6 weeks was enough time to develop routines. Bruce Banner had not had routines in a long time. Routines required stability, and stability required a place that stayed in one configuration long enough to build around, and the general trajectory of his life had not historically produced that condition. He had had patterns instead, the recurring behaviors of someone in motion, always the same actions in different locations. The way a river is always a river even when the riverbed changes. Here he had routines. 7 a.m., the garden. Not meditation exactly, more the practice of stillness that Piccolo had described as adjacent to meditation, and that Bruce had adapted into something that worked for the specific architecture of two people sharing one body. The bamboo caught the early light in a way he had started noticing with the specific attention you give things you have decided matter. The Hulk was present and quiet in the mornings, which was new, and Bruce had learned not to treat the quiet as a warning but as what it actually was, which was rest. 8 a.m., Bulma's lab. This was the part of the day that was entirely Bruce and had been since the second week, when Bulma had looked at his questions about the dimensional fracture tracking model and made the assessment that a physicist with his background was more useful as a collaborator than an observer. She had pulled up a secondary workstation without ceremony and handed him a tablet and said get started, and he had, and the work had been the specific quality of work that makes time behave differently, where hours move without announcing themselves and you look up and the light has changed. The model was 6 weeks from completion when he arrived. It was now, by his calculation and Bulma's confirmation, 48 hours from completion. 12 p.m., lunch at the long table. This had become the compound's fixed point, the meal that everyone found their way to regardless of what the morning had produced. Goku was always there first, having trained since 5 and achieved a hunger that operated at geological scale. Vegeta was always there exactly on time, which Bruce had come to understand was a form of participation that Vegeta would not have named as such. Piccolo rarely ate but appeared anyway, which was its own form of statement. Krillin came on Tuesdays and Thursdays with Kai Kai's food and his own specific energy, and those were the best lunches. 3 p.m., sparring or training theory, depending on what the morning's data suggested. Bruce had been developing a framework for understanding Kai through the lens of quantum field theory, mapping the emotional resonance component of Kai generation onto existing models of observer-dependent quantum states, and the framework was producing results that made Bulma stop working and read over his shoulder for long stretches. The Hulk found the theoretical work less interesting than the practical application, but had opinions about the practical application that were consistently useful. Evenings were variable, and that was fine. Variable evenings meant there was a stable enough day to vary from. It was on a Tuesday evening in the 43rd day. Krillin had brought food and they had played 2 rounds of a board game that Bruce was now genuinely good at, and Krillin remained genuinely terrible at in ways that had stopped being surprising and started being affectionate. That Bulma's lab alarm went off, not the perimeter alert, not the seismic array. The dimensional tracking model's primary sensor, which had been running its continuous fracture signature analysis for 6 weeks, and which was calibrated to register any change in the status of the specific interdimensional tier that had deposited the Hulk in the crater outside West City 43 days ago. The alarm meant change. Bruce was in the lab before Bulma had finished pulling up the display, the board game and the Tuesday evening simply ceasing to exist as a context the moment the alarm fired, replaced by the specific focused urgency of someone who had spent 6 weeks waiting for this data and knew what it meant. Bulma was at her primary workstation already, fingers moving across the interface with the speed she achieved when something required her full capability, and she was giving it. The display populated in layers, fracture signature data overlaid with dimensional membrane stress readings, and Bruce read it the way he read all data, completely and immediately, and what he read made him go very still. "That's not right," he said. "No," Bulma agreed, and her voice had the quality it got when something was interesting in a way she would have preferred it not be. The fracture had not stabilized. In the weeks since the Hulk's arrival, The dimensional tier that had opened in the sky above the sparring grounds should have been doing one of two things: closing naturally as the membrane repaired itself, which was the most common outcome for uncontrolled dimensional breaches according to the theoretical models Bulma had been building from first principles, or holding steady, maintained open by some ongoing energy differential. The tracking model had been designed to detect either condition and calculate the closure timeline or stabilization point accordingly. What it was showing instead was a third condition that the model had flagged as theoretically possible, but assigned a probability low enough that Bulma had built the interface to display it in a different color, the specific red that she reserved for outcomes that were possible but not planned for. The fracture was widening, not collapsing inward, not stabilizing. Actively expanding, the dimensional membrane pulling apart at the tier's edges with a slow, deliberate force that the sensor readings suggested was not random or entropic but directional. Something was pulling it open from the other side. Energy signature on the expansion vector, Bruce said, leaning over the display. That's not dimensional membrane stress, that's an applied force. Something is pushing through, Bulma said. Or pulling this side open to let something through, Bruce said. The directionality is wrong for a push. Look at the stress distribution on the membrane edges. If something was pushing from the Marvel side, the stress would concentrate at the leading edge of the breach. This is distributed across the full perimeter. Bulma looked at the data, looked at Bruce. Something on this side, she said. Something that knows the fracture is there, Bruce said. Something that wants it open. Hulk moved forward slightly in the interior. Not enough to shift the balance of presence, but enough to register. The specific movement he made when his instincts were producing information that the analytical process hadn't caught up to yet. Hulk, Bruce said quietly. Someone knows, the Hulk said simply from inside. Someone was watching when Hulk came through. Someone on this side who understood what they were looking at. Frieza's scout drone. It had been circling the compound on the day of the Hulk's arrival, collecting data, transmitting to the Planet Trade Organization remnant network. It had been present during the first hours when the dimensional fracture was still active and visible, and generating a signature that any sufficiently advanced sensor array would have recorded. Frieza's sensor arrays were sufficiently advanced. Bulma was already pulling up the scout drone's flight path data from her archived perimeter records, overlaying it with the fracture's initial coordinates and the drone's sensor specifications. He recorded the fracture signature, she said. He's been working on it for 6 weeks, Bruce said. Reverse engineering a dimensional breach from the outside is theoretically. He has resources, Bruce said, and patience, and a specific motivation. Lab was quiet except for the alarm that Bulma reached over and silenced, not because the situation had resolved, but because the alarm had communicated its information and continuing to sound was no longer useful. Long before it's wide enough to put something through, Bruce asked. Bulma's fingers moved. The model recalculated. The number it produced made her jaw set in the way it set when a timeline was tighter than she wanted. At current expansion rate, she said, 72 hours. The tracking model, completion timeline, 48 hours. A pause, so we finish the model first, Bruce said. And then what? Bulma said. The model tells us where the fracture is and what's coming through it. It doesn't close it. I know, Bruce said. He straightened from the display and looked at the fracture signature data, the red expanding line that represented something on the other side of reality being deliberately forced open. But knowing what's coming through is the difference between a plan and a reaction. Bulma looked at him for a moment with the assessing directness she applied to problems that required honest evaluation. You know what he'd send, she said. It was not quite a question. Bruce Banner, who had spent years being the most dangerous thing in every room, and who had spent those years watching people look at that danger, and immediately begin calculating how to replicate it, knew exactly what Frieza would send through a dimensional breach into the Marvel Universe, if given 6 weeks and a recorded fracture signature, and the specific motivation of having been beaten by something he wanted to own. He would send something designed to bring it back. Something built from the data, From the cellular scans that Carmine's scanner had captured in 40 seconds of live feed, from the power output readings from the battle, from everything the scout drone had recorded in the first hours, something that was not the Hulk but was built to understand the Hulk in the specific way that a key understands a lock. Yes, Bruce said. He walked to the lab doorway. Goku was already there. He hadn't done instant transmission. He had simply moved from the table to the lab with the casual speed that Goku deployed when he had sensed something shift in the kai of someone he was paying attention to, and had decided to be nearby without making it an announcement. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and his expression doing the thing it did when he was being serious without performing seriousness. I felt it, Goku said. In the upper atmosphere, a disturbance, like the air remembers something tearing. The fracture, Bruce said, it's widening. Frieza. Think so. Goku was quiet for a moment, processing. Does Vegeta know? Goku asked. Yet, he's going to be upset that he didn't sense it first, Goku said, with the genuine sympathy of someone who understood Vegeta well enough to preemptively feel bad about things on his behalf. That's not the priority right now, Bruce said. No, Goku agreed. But I'm going to tell him you said that. Kakarot, the Hulk said from inside, with the specific tone that contained both Bruce's exasperation and the Hulk's affection for a man who had been calling him friend since the first crater, and had not once made it complicated. Right, Goku said, straightening. What do we do? Bulma finishes the model, Bruce said. We find out what's coming, then we decide. In the meantime, Bruce looked at the lab, at the fracture signature on the display with its slow, deliberate expansion, at the 48-hour clock that was already running in the back of his mind with the specific precision of a physicist who had learned to treat time as a variable he could sometimes influence. In the meantime, Bruce said, we train, all of us, no holding back this time. Goku's expression moved through several configurations before settling on the one that meant he had been hoping someone would say that. Get Vegeta, he said. Tell him about the fracture first, Bruce said. Obviously, Goku said, already moving. I'm not going to just walk up to Vegeta and say, hey, want to do a full power session without context. That's how you get a final flash in the face. He was gone before Bruce could respond, leaving the hallway with the quiet that Goku left in spaces when he departed quickly, a kind of presence-shaped absence. Krillin appeared in the doorway a moment later, thermos in hand, with the expression of a man who had heard enough to understand the shape of the situation and was making his assessment. Bad, Krillin said. Developing, Bruce said. Is that better or worse than bad? It means we have 48 hours before we know how bad, Bruce said. Krillin nodded slowly, processing this with the philosophical equanimity of a man who had processed worse on shorter timelines. Want some coffee? Krillin said. Bruce looked at him. At the thermos. At the Tuesday evening that had been a good Tuesday evening before the alarm fired, and was now a different kind of evening entirely. The Hulk, from the interior, was doing the thing he did when he was paying attention to something Bruce was feeling rather than something external. The quiet, attentive presence of someone who had spent 43 days learning the difference between Bruce needing space and Bruce needing company. Yeah, Bruce said. Yeah, I would. He walked back into the lab. Bulma was already deep in the model recalculation, one hand on the interface and the other wrapped around her own mug, and she had pulled up the secondary workstation without looking up, the automatic accommodation of someone who had stopped thinking of the space as hers alone sometime in the past 3 weeks without making a formal announcement about it. Bruce sat down. The fracture signature pulsed on the display with its slow red expansion. The clock ran 47 hours and 53 minutes. Outside, somewhere in the compound, Vegeta's voice rose briefly in a tone that suggested Goku had led with the full power session rather than the fracture context. The Hulk, from inside, made a sound. It took Bruce a moment to identify it. It was a laugh, small, quiet, and completely real. If you want to see what Frieza sends through that fracture, and whether the Hulk's integration survives what's coming, hit that subscribe button and drop what Marvel character you want to see cross into Dragon Ball next in the comments below. The fracture is open. Anything could come through. Beerus arrived the next morning without calling ahead. This was not unusual. Beerus operated on the premise that his arrival was itself sufficient notice, that the universe's awareness of his presence was a courtesy he extended rather than a condition he required, and that the specific social ritual of announcing oneself before appearing was a convention developed by beings who needed other beings to prepare for them, which he categorically did not. He materialized in the compound's central courtyard at 6:47 a.m., with Wise beside him and the particular energy of someone who had made a decision during the night and had seen no reason to wait past dawn to execute it. The compound's perimeter sensors registered the arrival and fed it to Bulma's monitoring system, which generated an alert that Bulma, who had been working through the night on the dimensional model, acknowledged with the specific expression she wore when a complication arrived before she had finished addressing the previous one. "Of course," she said, to nobody. Bruce was in the garden when the alert reached his tablet. He looked at the sensor reading, identified the Kai signature that Bulma's system had catalogued during the post-battle formal acknowledgement, and sat with the information for a moment before standing. The Hulk was immediately present. Not forward, not agitated, but the quality of his attention had sharpened in the way it did when something was happening that required both of them to be fully operational. "Beerus," Bruce said quietly. "Yes," the Hulk said. "He said he wanted to see what made you angry." "Said that 6 weeks ago," the Hulk said. "He has been patient. Gods of destruction are apparently patient when they find something interesting enough to wait for. Should Hulk be concerned?" Bruce considered the question honestly, which was the only way he knew how to consider things that mattered. He thought about Beerus's face during the formal acknowledgement, the 4-billion-year-old eyes that had processed the battle data and produced the specific conclusion about the third category of powerful beings, the ones who chose continuously and with effort. He thought about the word Wise had added to the cosmic registry, choosing. "I think," Bruce said carefully, "that Beerus is going to push us, deliberately and specifically and without much concern for whether we find it comfortable." He paused. "I also think he is not going to do it carelessly. There is a difference," the Hulk said. "Yes, between being tested and being used." The Hulk was quiet for a moment. "Hulk has not always been able to tell the difference in the moment," the Hulk said, and the honesty of it was the specific kind that cost something, the admission of a vulnerability that was not physical. "I know," Bruce said. "That's why both of us need to be present for this." They walked to the courtyard together. The balance of integration settled slightly more toward Bruce than it had been in the early weeks, the visible result of 43 days of practiced coexistence. A green frame that moved with the Hulk's mass and carried the Hulk's presence, but held itself with something that was recognizably Banner in its deliberateness. Beerus was standing in the center of the courtyard eating from a bowl of fruit that had not been there before he arrived, and that Wise had apparently produced from somewhere without ceremony. He looked up when Bruce appeared. "You look different," Beerus said. "Different from when?" Bruce asked. "When you landed in the crater," Beerus said. "You were all edges then, everything pulled tight." He ate a piece of fruit with meditative appreciation. "You're less tight now." 43 days of not being in crisis will do that," Bruce said. Beerus handed the bowl back to Wise and looked at Bruce with the full attention of his golden eyes, which had the specific quality of attention that comes from something that has never needed to pretend to be interested in things it wasn't interested in, pure unfiltered focus, disconcerting in its completeness. "I want to spar." Bruce was quiet. "A request," Beerus said pleasantly. "No," Bruce said. "I understand that." He looked at the god of destruction of Universe 7, at the ancient power that sat in the slim feline frame with the ease of something that had never needed to demonstrate itself, and therefore had nothing to prove, and he made the assessment that Banner made and the Hulk made simultaneously, each from their different angle, arriving at the same place. "Okay," Bruce said. Beerus blinked. It was a small blink, almost imperceptible, but Bruce had been reading small reactions on powerful faces for long enough to know that it was the blink of someone who had been prepared for negotiation and received agreement instead. "Just like that," Beerus said. "Going to do it anyway," Bruce said. "Saying no doesn't change that, it just means I'm reactive instead of present when it starts." He paused. I'd rather be present. Wise, standing 2 steps to Beerus's right, smiled the small, precise smile that Bruce had learned to read as genuine pleasure rather than social performance. Remarkable, Wise said quietly to no one in particular. Beerus looked at Bruce for a moment longer. Like you, Beerus said, which in the vocabulary of gods of destruction was approximately equivalent to a Congressional Medal of Honor. Don't get killed, working on it, Bruce said. They moved to the eastern compound, the designated sparring ground that had been used for 6 weeks of training, and had developed the geological character of an area where significant things had been attempted regularly. The rock formations had been rearranged. The topsoil had been compressed in patterns that recorded the history of exchanges between beings operating well above its structural tolerance. It looked, Krillin had once observed, like a very enthusiastic art project. Goku and Vegeta were already there. Goku because he had sensed Beerus's arrival and moved toward it with the instinctive excitement of someone who associated Beerus's presence with things that were about to become extremely interesting. Vegeta because Vegeta had sensed Beerus's arrival and moved toward it with the instinctive wariness of someone who had a complex and extensively documented history with the god of destruction and had learned to be present when that history was active rather than surprised by it later. Piccolo arrived from the north without explanation. Krillin arrived from the direction of the kitchen with a thermos and a folding chair, which was his consistent contribution to events that were going to require observation from a safe distance. Beerus stood at the edge of the flat expanse and looked at Bruce. I'm going to use 20%, Beerus said. Of your full power? Bruce asked. Yes, Bruce processed this. He had been in this universe long enough to understand what 20% of Beerus's power represented in practical terms. He had run the mathematics from the battle data and the chi-scaling models, and the information that had come through in conversations over 6 weeks, the kind of information that accumulates in a place where people are comfortable talking about power levels the way people in his world talked about weather. 20% of Beerus could crack a planet, not destroy. Crack. There was a distinction, and Beerus had presumably made it deliberately. Banner, the Hulk said from inside, and his voice was doing the layered thing, both present, both assessing. We can handle 20%. You think, Bruce said. No, the Hulk said. But we can handle what 20% does to us, what it makes us. That is different. Bruce stood at the edge of the flat expanse and looked at the space between himself and a god of destruction who was going to hit him with 20% of his capacity, and he took a breath, and he let the Hulk come forward and the integration shifted, the balance moving from Bruce primary to the shared state that had become their most stable configuration under pressure. The frame expanded slightly. The green deepened, Beerus moved. The first contact was not a punch. It was a palm strike to the sternum that traveled faster than the sound of its own approach, and it hit with the specific quality of force that exists at divine levels, not just energy but authority, something that operated below the physical and above it simultaneously, the kind of impact that did not just move the body but questioned it. The Hulk went back 40 meters and hit the compressed earth of the sparring ground and left a trench. He was on his feet before the dust arrived. The gamma output spiked. The adaptive cellular response fired immediately, the biology reading the divine energy and beginning its restructuring process, and Bruce felt it from the inside the way he always felt it, as a rising tide in a room where the ceiling was the most important architectural feature. That's new, the Hulk said from inside his own body. The divine energy component, Bruce said. Kai has it too, but not at this concentration. Your cells are trying to adapt to a frequency they've never encountered. It working. Bruce ran the internal assessment with the speed of someone who had spent years knowing his own biology more thoroughly than any external scanner had managed. Yes, slower than normal, but yes. Then we stay in it, the Hulk said. They stayed in it. Beerus hit them 9 more times in the next 4 minutes, varying the energy composition of each strike with the deliberate methodology of a being who was running a test rather than a fight, changing the divine frequency component, adjusting the physical force ratio. approaching from different angles with the systematic thoroughness of someone mapping something. Each time the Hulk went back. Each time he got up. Each time the gamma output climbed. On the seventh strike, something happened that made Goku go very still at the ridge's edge with his Kai sense fully extended. On the eighth strike, it made Vegeta straighten from his crossed-arm posture and step forward involuntarily before catching himself. On the ninth, it made Piccolo, who had been watching with his arms folded and his expression in analytical mode, unfold his arms. The Hulk's power signature was changing. Not escalating in the familiar anger-driven way, not the slow geological climb of the adaptive response, but restructuring, the gamma radiation interacting with the divine energy component of Beerus's strikes, and producing something at their intersection that had not existed before. A hybrid frequency that Bulma's instruments, which she had deployed remotely from the lab while continuing to work on the dimensional model, had no existing category for. What is he doing? Goku said quietly to the air. Adapting, Wise said from beside him. Wise had moved from the courtyard to the ridge at some point without anyone registering the transition, which was simply how Wise moved through space. Not just physically. The integration is deepening under divine pressure. The Banner component and the Hulk component are being forced into a closer configuration than they have previously achieved. That good? Goku asked. That, Wise said, watching the sparring ground with the expression of someone observing something they had hypothesized and are now seeing confirmed, depends entirely on what configuration they find. On the 10th strike, Beerus paused. He stood in the middle of the sparring ground and looked at the Hulk, who was standing upright with the trench of his previous trajectory behind him and the new frequency running through his cellular output in a pattern that was visible at the Kai sense level as a faint golden-green luminescence that had not been present in Part 1 and was not gamma and was not Kai but was something that occupied the space where they intersected. Interesting, Beerus said. He was not breathing hard. He had not been breathing hard at any point, but his golden eyes had the specific quality they got when something had exceeded the parameters of his expectations, and Beerus's expectations were calibrated against 4 billion years of data. What did you find? The Hulk asked. What did you find? Beerus replied. The Hulk was quiet for a moment that contained a conversation happening at the integration level. Banner and the Hulk examining what the divine pressure had produced, mapping the new configuration, testing its edges with the careful attention of two people who had spent 43 days learning to trust each other's assessments. What they found was this: the divine energy had not damaged them. It had not overwhelmed the adaptive response. What it had done was force the integration to a depth they had not previously accessed, a level of shared processing where the distinction between Banner's analysis and the Hulk's instinct was not absent but was thinner, the membrane between them worn to translucency by the pressure of divine force applied repeatedly with calibrated precision. At that depth, they were not more powerful exactly, they were more coherent. We found, Bruce said, and the voice was layered in a new way, both present but not alternating, genuinely simultaneous in a way that had not happened before, that there is a level below the integration we had, that we had not been as integrated as we thought. Beerus tilted his head, and now, Beerus said. Now, the Hulk said in the same simultaneous voice, we are closer. Beerus looked at them for a long moment. Then he did something that nobody on the ridge had ever seen him do in a sparring context. He bowed. A small bow, barely a degree of inclination, the absolute minimum that a god of destruction could produce and still have it count as a bow. But it was genuine. The gesture of someone acknowledging something that deserved acknowledgement, regardless of the effort the acknowledgement required. 20%, he said, straightening. And you found something new. A pause, commendable. Wise on the ridge exhaled slowly with the quality of someone releasing a breath they had been holding for longer than the conversation warranted. Goku looked at him. You knew, Goku said. You knew the divine pressure would do that. I hypothesized, Wise said carefully. The integration of two components under sustained divine force has theoretical precedence in the cosmic literature. It is not commonly observed because the conditions that produce it are rare. He paused. beings who are genuinely two things simultaneously and who have done sufficient work to make that simultaneity stable enough to withstand divine pressure rather than fragment under it. You wanted it to happen, Goku said. You suggested this to Beerus. Wise smiled. Lord Beerus makes his own decisions. I may have presented certain theoretical frameworks in a sequence that made the conclusion feel natural, Wise said, with the precise admission of someone who has calculated exactly how much honesty is both truthful and strategic. Vegeta, who had been listening with his arms crossed and his expression performing neutrality, looked at Wise with the specific look he reserved for occasions when someone had been operating at a level of planning he had not anticipated and was recalibrating his assessment of them. Why? Vegeta said. Wise looked at the sparring ground below, at the Hulk standing in the golden-green luminescence of the new frequency, with Beerus regarding him with something that approached respect in the vocabulary of gods. Because what is coming through that fracture, Wise said, and his voice had shifted from its customary pleasant neutrality to something quieter and more direct, will require them to be more than they were yesterday. He paused, and the timeline did not allow for the natural development of that depth. Silence on the ridge. You know what's coming through, Bruce said from the sparring ground below. He had heard. The new integration depth apparently came with enhanced sensory processing at the Kai level, because he had heard Wise's words from 40 meters away without apparent effort. Wise looked down at him. Have a hypothesis, Wise said. Tell me, Bruce said. Wise was quiet for a moment with the specific deliberateness of someone choosing words for a difficult delivery. Frieza did not simply reverse engineer the fracture signature, Wise said. He used it as a template, a blueprint for constructing a dimensional anchor, a device that opens a controlled breach between specific universal coordinates. He paused, but the anchor requires an energy source substantial enough to maintain the opening. Frieza does not have that energy source. Then how is the fracture widening? Bulma's voice came from the compound, transmitted through the remote sensor array she'd been monitoring from the lab, because he found something in the Marvel universe, Wise said. Something that was already near the fracture coordinates, something with sufficient energy output to power the anchor from the other side. He looked at Bruce. Something that knows your signature and was drawn to the fracture by it. Bruce Banner went very still. The Hulk inside went very still in a different way. It was near the fracture coordinates in my universe, Bruce said, and his voice was flat and clinical in the way it got when he was doing the specific kind of thinking that required all the emotional processing to step back to make room. Was a gamma-based entity. We were fighting it when the portal took me, Wise said. Gamma anomaly, Bruce said. It tracks gamma signatures. It was created from absorbed gamma radiation. It doesn't have intelligence exactly, but it has directionality. It follows the largest gamma source it can detect. The largest gamma source it could detect, Wise said quietly, has been broadcasting continuously from this universe for 43 days. The golden-green luminescence around the Hulk flickered. It's following me, Bruce said. It is being guided to you, Wise said, by Frieza's anchor, which uses its tracking instinct as the power source for the breach. He paused. A considerable piece of engineering. I was impressed despite myself. How large is it? The Hulk said, and his voice had dropped to the register it occupied when the geological layers were present and paying attention. Wise was quiet for a moment. In your universe, he said carefully. How large was it when you last saw it? Continental, Bruce said. Nobody on the ridge said anything. Beerus, standing in the sparring ground, looked at Wise with the expression of a cat who has been presented with a problem that is interesting and large in approximately equal measure. And in this universe, Beerus said, fed by 43 days of the Hulk's ambient gamma output. He paused. It will be larger. Considerably, Wise said. The compound alarm fired again. Not the perimeter alert, not the dimensional tracking model, the atmospheric sensor. The one calibrated to detect energy signatures in the upper atmosphere and beyond. Bulma's voice came through the remote array immediately, stripped of everything except information. The fracture is accelerating. The expansion rate just tripled. Something made contact with the anchor from the other side. Bruce looked at the sky. The same sky he had been watching for 43 days with the particular attention of someone who had decided it was worth watching. Blue and wide and full of more stars than home, the Hulk looked with him. The new integration depth was present and operational, the thinner membrane, the more coherent configuration that Beerus's divine pressure had produced. They examined it together from the inside, testing its stability under the weight of what Wise had just told them. The specific weight of knowing that something they had been fighting in their own universe had followed them here, and was being used as a weapon by someone who understood leverage better than almost anyone. "Banner," the Hulk said. "I know," Bruce said. "We brought this here." "People here." "I know," Bruce said. "I know." Hulk was quiet. Then, with the specific deliberateness of someone making a decision at the level where decisions are made without performance, "Then we fix it." Bruce looked at his hands. Green and large and capable of things that still sometimes surprised him with their range, destruction at one end and further along the spectrum than most people ever looked, protection. The choosing that Wise had written into the cosmic registry. "Yeah," Bruce said, "we fix it." Goku landed beside them from the ridge with the easy speed that made landing look like arriving. "Okay," Goku said. With the direct simplicity that was his most reliable quality in every situation. "What do we do first?" Bruce looked at the sky, at the fracture coordinates that his dimensional model could now pinpoint within meters, at the 72-hour window that had just become something shorter. "First," Bruce said, "we get Bulma." "She's already running models," Goku said. "She's running the dimensional model," Bruce said. "I need her running a different one, a containment model. Something that can hold a continental scale gamma entity long enough to..." He stopped. "Long enough to what exactly?" The Hulk provided the end of the sentence from inside with the quiet certainty of someone who had been working toward an answer since Wise started talking. "Long enough for Hulk to absorb it," the Hulk said. Bruce went very still. "That would mean," he started. "Yes," the Hulk said. "Power increase would be..." "Yes," the Hulk said. "We don't know what that does to the integration." "No," the Hulk said, "but we know what leaving it uncontrolled does to the people on this planet." A pause. "Banner." "Yeah, trust us." Bruce Banner stood in the sparring ground of a universe that was not his, with a god of destruction watching him and a divine advisor waiting and the man who had asked if he was okay standing at his shoulder, and he looked at his hands one more time. "Okay," he said, both of them together choosing. The fracture coordinates were 40 kilometers east of West City, the same 40 kilometers where the original sparring ground had been, where Goku and Vegeta had been trading exchanges when the sky cracked and a green giant fell through it. This was not coincidence. Frieza's dimensional anchor had been calibrated to the original breach point, with the precision of someone who understood that interdimensional mechanics had specific geometry, that the place where reality had torn once was structurally predisposed to tear again, the way an old scar is both stronger and more vulnerable than unmarked skin, depending entirely on the direction of the force applied. Bulma identified the anchor coordinates from the atmospheric sensor data in 23 minutes. She presented the analysis to the assembled group in the strategy room with the compressed efficiency of someone operating on no sleep and significant caffeine, and the specific focused energy that arrived when a problem was large enough to require her complete capability, and she had decided to give it. "Anchor is a physical device," she said, pulling up the reconstructed sensor data on the central display. "Not a dimensional phenomenon, not a natural occurrence. Something Frieza's engineers built and deployed at those coordinates, underground, probably during the period when his scout network was most active in this area." She overlaid the anchor's energy signature with the fracture expansion data. "It's been running passively for weeks, building charge from the ambient gamma radiation that the Hulk has been producing since he arrived. He's been using me as a battery," Bruce said from his seat at the table. "The anchor's power reserves, yes," Bulma said. "The anchor itself opens the breach. The gamma anomalies tracking instinct provides the directionality, but the charge that powers the opening sequence has been accumulating from your ambient output since day one." She paused. The scout drone wasn't just collecting data, it was seeding the anchor's collection network. "Many collection nodes," Vegeta said. 17, Bulma said. distributed across a 50-kilometer radius centered on the Capsule Corporation compound. She looked at Vegeta. Compound, my home. Her voice was entirely level. He planted 17 energy collection devices in the ground around my home 6 weeks ago. Room absorbed this. Vegeta's expression did something that moved through several configurations before settling on the one that meant he was filing a specific grievance in a specific internal registry that had Frieza's name on it and that had been accumulating entries since before most people in the room had been born. Anchor, Piccolo said. Can it be destroyed? Yes, Bulma said. With sufficient precision. The problem is the fracture. If we destroy the anchor while the fracture is actively expanding, we remove the controlled element from an uncontrolled process. The breach could collapse immediately, which is good, or it could destabilize in ways that... She pulled up a secondary model. The theoretical outcomes range from fine to extremely not fine. Define extremely not fine, Krillin said. Uncontrolled dimensional cascade. Breach doesn't close, it propagates. New fractures opening at random coordinates across a widening radius. She looked at the table. We could be talking about tiers in multiple locations simultaneously, multiple entry points, multiple gamma anomalies, Bruce said, or worse, Bulma said, things that aren't the gamma anomaly. Random dimensional incursion isn't selective. You get whatever was near a fracture point when it opened. Silence, so we cannot simply destroy the anchor, Piccolo said. Yet, Bulma said, we need the fracture to be either closed from the inside or stable enough that anchor destruction doesn't destabilize it. She looked at Bruce. Which brings us back to your plan. The absorption, Goku said. He had been listening with his hands flat on the table and his expression in the mode it occupied when he was taking something seriously enough to set aside the reflexive optimism. You absorb the gamma anomaly. That removes the energy source powering the anchor. Without the energy source, the anchor goes dormant. Without the anchor, the fracture begins natural closure. Theory, Bruce said, and the part where we don't know what absorbing a continental-scale gamma entity does to the integration, Piccolo said. Also in theory, Bruce said. Vegeta, who had been silent since the revelation about the collection nodes, spoke. His voice had the quality it got when he had been running calculations for long enough to arrive at a conclusion he didn't want, and was going to deliver it accurately anyway. There is a second problem, Vegeta said. Absorbing the anomaly requires proximity. Direct contact at sustained range. The anomaly tracks gamma signatures, meaning it will move toward the Hulk regardless, which solves the approach problem. He paused. Proximity to a continental-scale gamma entity in an active tracking state will trigger defensive responses from its outer boundary before contact is achieved. Responses that will be felt at a significant radius. How significant? Krillin asked. A continental-scale entity with a full charge, Vegeta said. Everything within 30 kilometers of the contact point takes direct energy exposure. Everything within 100 kilometers takes pressure wave damage. He looked at the tactical display. The fracture coordinates are 40 kilometers from West City. Nobody needed to finish that calculation. Bulma was already pulling up West City's population data with one hand and the evacuation protocol files with the other, because Bulma responded to the identification of a problem by immediately moving toward its solution rather than dwelling in the identification. We have 40 hours, she said, before the fracture reaches full breach width, at current expansion rate. She looked at the table. I can have West City at 60% evacuation in 12 hours, full evacuation in 24 if we start now. The cover story, Goku said. Seismic activity, Bulma said. The anchor's been producing measurable ground vibrations for 6 weeks. I have the data. The infrastructure department has been filing reports. She paused. It's not even a lie. Start the evacuation, Vegeta said. It was not a discussion. It was Vegeta assessing a situation that involved his planet and the people on it, and issuing a directive with the authority of someone who had spent years learning what that authority was actually for. Nobody argued. Bulma was on her communicator before he finished the sentence. The evacuation began at 9 a.m. and proceeded with the specific organized efficiency of a city that had been through enough impossible events to have developed institutional muscle memory for crisis. The seismic cover story held because it was substantially true, and because Bulma's data presentation to the City Emergency Management Office was comprehensive enough that the officials receiving it spent their time executing the response rather than questioning the premise. Bruce and the Hulk spent the morning at the fracture coordinates, running the absorption methodology in the theoretical space, working through the physics of what would be required. The new integration depth that Beerus's session had produced made the internal consultation faster, the thinner membrane between them allowing a quality of simultaneous processing that compressed the back and forth of their usual collaboration into something closer to a single sustained thought with two perspectives. The absorption itself was theoretically straightforward. The Hulk's cellular structure had always had the capacity to incorporate external gamma radiation. It was the foundational mechanic of his existence. Bruce Banner's body absorbing the gamma bomb's output and producing something that had been running on that absorbed energy ever since. Absorbing an external gamma entity was a larger version of the same process. The question was scale. The gamma anomaly had been continental when Bruce last saw it. It had been feeding on ambient gamma output from a universe with multiple gamma-active beings for 6 weeks since. It had been in contact with the anchor's energy field, which had been adding its own charge. The entity that would come through the fracture would be significantly larger than continental. Significantly larger meant significantly more gamma energy. Significantly more gamma energy, absorbed by the Hulk's cellular structure in a compressed time frame, meant a power increase of a magnitude that neither Bruce nor the Hulk had a precedent for. World-breaker event, Bruce said in the quiet of the fracture coordinates, standing on the flat earth above Frieza's buried anchor, with the morning light coming down and the city's evacuation running at the edge of his awareness. The geological record suggested the output was sufficient to destroy a small moon. The Hulk said, if we absorb something at this scale, the power increase puts us well past world-breaker baseline. We don't know what the integration does at that level, whether it holds, whether the coherence we've built is stable under that much input. The Hulk said, we don't know, that's a significant variable. Yes, Bruce was quiet for a moment. Are you afraid? He asked. The Hulk was quiet for a moment that was longer than a simple yes or no required. Hulk is not afraid of the power, the Hulk said finally. Hulk has never been afraid of the power. The power is, he paused, finding the word in the space between vocabulary and experience. Familiar, it is the only thing that has always been there. Then what? Hulk is afraid, the Hulk said, with the specific deliberateness of someone saying a true thing that has not previously been said aloud, of what the power does to the choosing. Whether there is enough of us at that level to keep choosing what we have been choosing. Bruce Banner stood on the flat earth above the buried anchor and felt the weight of that sentence settle into the architecture of everything they had built in 43 days. There is enough of us, Bruce said. You are certain? No, Bruce said, but I think certainty isn't the point. I think we do it anyway and we trust what we've built. Hulk was quiet. Krillin would say that, the Hulk said finally. Yeah, Bruce said. Would? Fracture changed at noon. Bulma's atmospheric sensors registered it first. A shift in the expansion rate that moved from steady progression to active surge. The dimensional membrane pulling apart at the tier's edges with a sudden urgency that indicated the gamma anomaly had made full contact with the anchor from the other side, and its tracking instinct had locked onto the gamma signature waiting on this side of the breach. Bulma's voice came through the communicator immediately. It smells you, the anomaly. It's pushing through. We've lost the 72-hour window. How long? Bruce said. At this rate. A pause filled with the sound of rapid calculations. 3 hours, maybe 4. Bruce looked at the sky above the fracture coordinates, the blue that had 43 days of familiarity in it now, and then down at the ground beneath his feet, where Frieza's anchor sat in its buried housing, radiating the collected charge of 6 weeks of his own ambient output back at him like a mirror he hadn't known was installed. He called Goku. Goku arrived before the call connected. Instant transmission to a Kai signature he had spent 6 weeks memorizing to a precision that made GPS look approximate. He landed in the flat earth and looked at Bruce, and the specific quality of the look was the one that had been present since the first crater. Direct and simple and entirely without agenda, asking nothing, prepared for anything. It's moving faster, Bruce said. I felt the fracture shift, Goku said. Everyone's on their way. The evacuation, Bulma says 60% complete, Goku said. She's pushing for 70 before the breach opens. Bruce nodded, looked at the fracture coordinates, which were invisible to the naked eye but present to his gamma sense as a specific wrongness in the air, a place where the dimensional membrane was thin enough that the universe on this side was aware, at some instinctive level below physics, of the pressure on the other side. Goku, Bruce said. The anomaly comes through. After the absorption, if the integration doesn't hold, he stopped. If something comes out of that process that isn't choosing anymore, Goku looked at him. You know what I'm asking, Bruce said. Yeah, Goku said quietly. Can you do it? Goku was quiet for a moment that had genuine weight in it, the weight of a man who had made this specific kind of promise before and knew exactly what it cost and what it meant. I won't have to, Goku said, but if you do, then yeah, Goku said. I can do it. He looked at Bruce with the directness that was his most consistent quality across every situation. But I won't have to, because you've already decided. Decided, Bruce said. The Hulk has decided. We don't know what happens at that power level. You decided in the crater too, Goku said. When you took the full output of Frieza at 100% and chose not to escalate, you didn't know what was going to happen then either. You decided anyway. He shrugged with the easy certainty of a man whose faith in people was not naive, but was the specific kind of faith that had been repeatedly tested and had repeatedly held. That's the same decision, just bigger. Bruce looked at him. You make it sound simple, Bruce said. It is simple, Goku said. It's hard, but it's simple. Those are different things. Ground shifted, not seismic. Not the anchor's vibration pattern that Bulma's instruments had been tracking for 6 weeks. Something different, a resonance from directly above, from the fracture coordinates in the upper air. A sound that was not quite a sound, but that registered in the chest cavity as something between a frequency and a feeling. The fracture was opening. Vegeta arrived with Piccolo 2 seconds later, both of them reading the same thing from their Kai sense. The dimensional membrane giving way at the coordinates with the accelerating urgency of something that had been held too long and had found its moment. Krillin arrived 30 seconds after that, which given his speed relative to the others represented a significant personal effort, and he was carrying the modified amplifier housing that Bulma had upgraded overnight, the recalibrated version with expanded bandwidth tolerances, and a secondary array she had added specifically for the absorption scenario, designed to channel the incoming gamma energy into the Hulk's cellular structure in a controlled sequence rather than an uncontrolled flood. Bulma says wear it, Krillin said, holding up the device. She's not here to install it, Bruce said. She walked me through it 3 times, Krillin said. I took notes. He held up his phone showing a photo of detailed handwritten instructions. She also said, and I'm quoting directly here, if he argues tell him the bandwidth tolerances are rated for 30% above the world breaker baseline, and I spent 11 hours on those tolerances, so he's wearing it. Bruce looked at the phone. At Krillin at the amplifier, she rated it above world breaker baseline, Bruce said. She rated it above world breaker baseline, Krillin confirmed. The Hulk came forward slightly in the integration. Put it on, he said simply. Krillin installed it with the careful precision of someone who had memorized instructions thoroughly and was executing them under pressure without letting the pressure affect the execution, which was the same skill that had kept him alive through events that should have been fatal by any reasonable metric. The fracture opened fully at 12:47 p.m. IT happened the way the original had happened, the sky developing a visible fault line of wrong light, but where the original had been a sudden catastrophic tear, this was a controlled expansion, Frieza's anchor pulling the membrane apart with structural deliberateness, creating an opening wide enough and stable enough to pass something through. Something came through immediately. It did not fall the way the Hulk had fallen. It poured. The gamma anomaly in its current state was not a discrete entity with edges so much as a field of concentrated gamma energy that had developed directionality and tracking behavior. A vast luminescent mass of radiation that had been feeding and growing for 6 weeks on the ambient output of the most powerful gamma source in 2 universes, and that had now located its origin point. It was larger than continental. It was larger than the planet. The portion of it that came through the fracture was a fraction of the whole. The anchor could not open a breach large enough for the full entity, but the fraction that arrived was sufficient to block the sky above the fracture coordinates and cast the surrounding landscape in a greenish light that had no natural analog, and that Bulma's sensors registered as a gamma radiation level that exceeded every safety threshold she had built into her monitoring system simultaneously. Piccolo looked up at it. "That's large," Piccolo said, with the specific understatement he deployed when the accurate description would not add useful information. "Very," Vegeta said, and his voice had the quality it got when something had exceeded the parameters of even his calibrated expectations. The anomaly's tracking behavior had locked onto the Hulk's signature the moment it came through. It moved toward him with the implacable directionality of something that did not think but knew, the way a river knows its gradient, the way gravity knows mass. Bruce felt it before it reached them. The pressure of that much gamma radiation at proximity, the cellular response firing at a level that went past the adaptive surge and into something deeper, the biological recognition of a frequency that was, at its core, the same as his own. It was made of the same thing he was made of. A different iteration, unstructured, without the banner component that had turned raw gamma energy into something that could choose, but fundamentally the same material. The Hulk understood this simultaneously. "It's us," the Hulk said from inside. "A version of what we could have been if there had been no banner, just the gamma and the anger and no one to decide what they were for." Bruce said. "Then absorbing it is not defeating it," the Hulk said. "It is completing it." Anomaly arrived. The first contact hit like the world-breaker threshold, hitting a wall it had never encountered before. Gamma meeting gamma, the Hulk's structured cellular field meeting the anomaly's unstructured mass at the interface point, and the amplifier array lit up in full deployment, every emitter node running, Bulma's 11 hours of bandwidth tolerance work being called upon simultaneously. The absorption began. It was not fast. It was not clean. It was the specific difficult process of something vast and unstructured being taken into something smaller and structured. The way a river absorbs a flood, not instantly, not without consequence, but progressively, the structure holding and shaping and incorporating, even as the volume tested every tolerance it had. Bruce stayed present. This was the critical requirement and the hardest one. The volume of incoming gamma energy was producing a pressure in the integration that pushed toward the world-breaker threshold from the inside, the power increase arriving faster than it could be fully processed, the cellular structure incorporating, and the output rising, and the question of whether the integration would hold at that level being answered in real time rather than theory. The Hulk was holding, not easily, not without effort, but holding with the specific quality of something that has been built properly. The 43 days of practice and the divine pressure session, and the garden mornings and Krillin's coffee and the board games, and the long table lunches and Piccolo's 1 nod and Vegeta's 1 hour in the garden and Bulma's open lab door. All of it present in the structure of the holding, all of it contributing to the coherence that was being tested at a level neither of them had anticipated when they began building it. "Banner," the Hulk said from inside, and the voice was strained in a way it had not been before, not weakening but working, fully extended, the effort audible. "I'm here," Bruce said. "Power is, I know. It wants to go somewhere," the Hulk said. "It builds and it wants to go somewhere. I know." Bruce said, "Let it build. Don't send it anywhere. Just hold." Hulk is holding. "I know you are." Outside the integration, Goku was watching the absorption with his Kai sense fully extended and his expression doing something that moved through several configurations. The Hulk's power signature was climbing in a way that his sense had no existing framework for, past the landmarks he had used to calibrate his understanding of power since he was a child, past the levels he had trained toward for decades, into territory that his sense could register but not fully interpret. He went Super Saiyan Blue without deciding to, the automatic response of a body that recognized the ambient power level and adjusted, not to fight but to remain stable in the proximity of something that was rewriting the local definition of significant. Vegeta went blue beside him, the same automatic response, the same wordless acknowledgement that the scale of what was happening required a different baseline to stand next to. The absorption took 47 minutes. 47 minutes of the Hulk's cellular structure, incorporating a continental-scale gamma entity that had been growing for 6 weeks on the output of the most powerful gamma source in 2 universes. 47 minutes of Bruce holding the integration at a depth that required everything the 43 days had produced. 47 minutes of the amplifier running at the tolerances Bulma had rated it for and occasionally slightly above, the secondary array compensating, the channeling structure directing the incoming volume into the cellular incorporation sequence rather than the uncontrolled output that was waiting on the other side of the threshold. At minute 31, the fracture above them began to close. The anomaly's energy was no longer flowing through it. The anchor beneath them, deprived of the energy source that had been powering its opening sequence, began its dormancy cycle. The dimensional membrane released from the tension of the controlled breach began its natural repair process, the tear drawing closed with the slow deliberateness of something that wanted to be whole. Bulma's voice came through the communicator at minute 38. The fracture is at 40% closed. The anchor is dormant. The collection nodes have gone offline. A pause. It's working. At minute 47, the last of the anomaly's mass was incorporated. The sky above the fracture coordinates cleared. The greenish light that had had no natural analog faded. The fracture, at 63% closure and accelerating toward full repair, drew itself together in the upper air with the quiet finality of something fulfilling its nature. The Hulk stood in the flat earth of the sparring ground in the sudden ordinary light of a Thursday afternoon, and the silence that arrived when something enormous has finished happening, and the world has not caught up to the fact yet. Goku dropped out of Super Saiyan Blue. Vegeta dropped out of Super Saiyan Blue. Neither of them said anything. The Hulk's power signature registered on Goku's Kai sense at a level that produced a very specific response, which was that Goku stood very still and looked at the Hulk with the expression he wore when something had exceeded the parameters of his existing categories, and he was building a new one in real time. The golden-green luminescence that the divine pressure session had produced was still present. It was brighter now, significantly brighter. Structured in a way that it had not been before the absorption, the hybrid gamma-divine frequency organized into something that had coherence and intention rather than just existing at the intersection of 2 power types. The Hulk looked at his hands. The integration was intact, not just intact. The absorption had done to the integration at the power level what Beerus' session had done to it at the structural level, pushed it to a depth it had not previously accessed, and found that the depth held. "Banner," the Hulk said. "Here," Bruce said. "We are different," the Hulk said. "Yes," Bruce said. "Are we still us?" Bruce Banner examined the integration from the inside with the thoroughness he brought to things that required honest assessment rather than reassuring assessment. He checked the coherence, the membrane thickness, the quality of the shared processing. The presence of the choosing, the specific orientation toward protection rather than destruction that had been the integration's most important characteristic, and that had been tested at a level that should have been sufficient to break it. "Yes," Bruce said, "we are still us." A pause. "More of us maybe, but still us." Hulk looked up from his hands. Goku was standing 20 meters away, out of Super Saiyan Blue, with his hands in his pockets, and his expression doing the thing it did when he was about to say something that was simple and completely right. "Okay," Goku said. Bruce Banner felt something move through the integration, something that was both of them simultaneously, something warm and uncomplicated in the specific way that the things you have chosen and defended, and held through the hardest test available, become warm and uncomplicated on the other side of the test. The Hulk's face did the thing it had been doing more often since the garden on day 4, the compressed leading edge of a smile, and this time it arrived completely, full and unhurried, unguarded in a way that the Hulk's face had not been at the beginning of this. "Yeah," Bruce said. "Yeah, we're okay." Piccolo from 40 meters away unfolded his arms. Krillin from behind his folding chair raised his thermos. Vegeta looked at the sky where the fracture had been, now closed, the dimensional membrane whole and unremarkable, and said nothing, which was the version of Vegeta saying everything that mattered. Above them, the Thursday afternoon continued its ordinary business, unaware and irreplaceable. Below them, Frieza's anchor sat dormant in its buried housing, deprived of its energy source, its purpose concluded, its engineering impressive and ultimately insufficient. The fracture was closed. The anomaly was gone. The integration had held, and somewhere in the specific depth of the shared space where Bruce Banner and the Hulk had learned, over 43 days and one very significant Thursday afternoon, to be more than the sum of their considerable parts, something settled, not resolved, not finished. Nothing that mattered was ever fully finished, but settled. The way things settle when they have found, after a long search conducted under difficult conditions, the configuration they were built for. Frieza sent a message at 3 am not through a fleet, not through an operative, not through any of the layered, deniable infrastructure that he typically used to communicate things. He wanted to communicate without being seen to communicate them. A direct transmission, unencrypted, broadcast on a frequency that Bulma's monitoring system flagged immediately, because it was the specific frequency that the Planet Trade Organization used for formal declarations. The kind that went into the historical record and were intended to. Bulma read it at 3:14 a.m., alone in her lab with the post-absorption data still running on her primary display and the cold coffee of a long night sitting at her elbow. She read it twice. Then she sat very still for 30 seconds. Then she woke everyone up. The message was 11 words. Did you enjoy my gift? The real one arrives at dawn. The strategy room at 4 a.m. had the specific quality of rooms that are occupied by people who have not slept and who have received information that has reorganized the landscape of what they thought they were dealing with. Coffee existed. Nobody was drinking it with any particular pleasure. The message was on the central display, 11 words in the Planet Trade Organization's formal transmission font, and everyone in the room had been looking at it long enough to have read it many more times than necessary. Gamma anomaly was not the weapon, Piccolo said. He had arrived at this conclusion in the first 30 seconds and had been waiting for the room to catch up before saying it aloud. It was the delivery mechanism, Bruce said, or part of it. He was standing at the display with the Hulk present in the integration at the level they had maintained since the absorption, the new depth, the thinner membrane. The anchor collected my ambient output for 6 weeks. The anomaly was drawn by my signature. It came through and I absorbed it. He looked at the display. He knew I would absorb it. Counted on it, Vegeta said, from the corner of the room where he was standing with his arms crossed and his jaw set and the expression of a man who was performing calmness over something that was not calm. The absorption increases your power significantly. He has the data from the anomalies approach from the fracture event from 6 weeks of ambient readings. He knows what you absorbed. He knows approximately what it did to your power level. Built something to match it, Goku said. Not a question, an arrival. He built something to match it, Vegeta confirmed. The room was quiet. Scout data from the first battle, Bruce said. The 40 seconds of live feed from Carmine's scanner. The cellular scan data. He has had 6 weeks and a specific motivation and resources that span a galaxy. He looked at his hands. The golden-green luminescence of the post-absorption integration was visible if you looked carefully, a faint structured glow that operated below the visual threshold of normal light, but above it when the room was dark enough. What can you build in 6 weeks from that data if you have Planet Trade Organization research capacity? Anything, Bulma said flatly. He had been running models since she read the message, and the models had been producing answers she didn't want and that she was going to deliver accurately anyway. With that data profile and those resources, in 6 weeks, you could build a biosynthetic gamma-reactive entity. She pulled up a schematic on the secondary display, a theoretical construct she had assembled from the Planet Trade Organization's known research capabilities and the specific data points that Frieza's network had collected. Not a clone, not a copy, a functional analog, something that replicates the power profile without the biological history. Without Banner, the Hulk said from inside. Without Banner, Bulma confirmed. The gamma-reactive power generation, the adaptive cellular response, the anger-based escalation, all of it running without the psychological architecture that Banner provides, without the integration, without the choosing. She looked at the schematic, a version of what you are that has no reason to hold back. Specific silence that followed was the kind that arrives when a room full of people who are very good at processing difficult information has received information that is difficult even for them. He's sending it through the fracture, Krillin said. The fracture is closed, Goku said. There were 17 collection nodes, Bruce said. We identified the anchor. We didn't find all 17 nodes. He looked at Bulma. Did we? Bulma was already pulling up the node detection data from the prior day's analysis. She ran the count. She ran it again. 14, she said quietly. We found 14. Remaining 3 nodes were distributed across the northern edge of the detection radius, barely within sensor range, positioned with the specific intentionality of things that were meant to be the last found if found at all. They had been running passively since the anchor went dormant, maintaining a residual charge at a level too low to trigger the monitoring thresholds that had been calibrated for the anchor's energy profile, too low individually, combined at the moment of deliberate activation, sufficient for a secondary breach, smaller than the anchor's opening, not large enough for the anomaly, large enough for one thing. He planned this from the beginning, Vegeta said, and there was something in his voice that was beyond the tactical assessment, something that had the weight of personal recognition. The anchor, the anomaly, the absorption, all of it was preparation. He was building the conditions for maximum power output from you and maximum destabilization from the engagement that follows. He looked at Bruce. He has studied you thoroughly. He knows that the thing most likely to push you past the world-breaker threshold is not pain or fear or loss. He paused. It is fighting something that is you but isn't. Something that shows you what you look like without the parts that make the rest bearable. Bruce absorbed this. Reflection, the Hulk said from inside, and his voice had the quality it got when he was processing something that landed at the level below intellect, in the place where the old things lived. He is sending Hulk a mirror with no banner in it, Vegeta said. He wants to see if looking in that mirror breaks the integration. Wants to see if looking in that mirror breaks the choosing, Vegeta said. If seeing what you could be without it makes the without it seem easier, more natural, more like what you actually are. Room was very quiet. Goku looked at Bruce. Bruce looked at the schematic on Bulma's secondary display. The Hulk looked at it from inside. It won't, Bruce said. No, the Hulk agreed, but it will be the hardest thing we've done, Bruce said. Yes, the Hulk said, it will be that. The 3 remaining nodes activated at 5:47 am. Bulma's sensors caught the activation immediately, the residual charge combining at a frequency that produced a secondary fracture at the original breach coordinates, smaller than the first opening, stable for approximately the window required to pass through something of specific dimensions, then self-terminating as the node charge exhausted. The window lasted 90 seconds. What came through it arrived differently from the Hulk. No fall. No crater, it landed standing, which was the specific difference between something that had been engineered for a purpose and something that had been an accident. It landed standing at the fracture coordinates in the flat earth of the sparring ground and straightened to its full height, and the sun was just beginning to come up behind it, and the light it cast was long and detailed. It was the color of gamma radiation in its purest visible form, not the forest green of the Hulk's cellular structure, but something more concentrated, more luminescent, the specific shade of something that was all power and no history. Its frame was larger than the Hulk's, the biosynthetic cellular structure built to the maximum dimensions that the scan data suggested were achievable, the adaptive response running at baseline rather than accumulated. Its face was not a face that had thought about things or held things or made decisions under difficult conditions. It was a face that had never had to. The Hulk looked at it through Bruce's eyes from 40 meters away and felt something that took a moment to identify because it was a new configuration of familiar components. It was grief, specifically the grief of looking at something that could have been you if the worst had been true, if there had been no Betty, no Rick. No one who had looked at the green giant and seen a person first. If the bomb had produced something without the man inside it, just the anger and the power and nothing to aim them at except everything within reach. Banner, the Hulk said quietly. See it, Bruce said. It is looking at us. Doesn't know what it's looking at, Bruce said. It has the tracking behavior, the gamma sense. It followed the signature. But there's no processing behind the eyes, no assessment, just the instinct. The instinct, our largest gamma signature in range, is the target, Bruce said. That's us. The biosynthetic entity moved. It was faster than its size suggested, because Frieza's engineers had studied the Hulk's speed data and had optimized the cellular structure for output without the weight of Banner's cautiousness in the joints. The specific hesitation that existed in the Hulk's movement at the edges of his speed, because some part of the integration was always accounting for what was behind him when he moved fast. This thing had no behind. It had only forward. Goku was already in motion when it moved, instant transmission placing him between the entity and the Hulk, Super Saiyan Blue already running. Because Goku's Kai sense had read the incoming at the moment, the fracture opened, and he had been making decisions since then that hadn't required conscious processing. The entity hit Goku. Goku went back 200 meters and hit the compressed earth of the sparring ground and left a trench that was significantly longer than any previous trench in the ground's extensive trench history and bounced twice before stabilizing. He was on his feet immediately, because Goku was always on his feet immediately. It was practically a philosophical position, but his expression when he straightened had shifted from the combat-ready focus to something more specific. It hits harder than you, Goku said to the Hulk across the distance. Yes, the Hulk said. It has no reason not to. Vegeta arrived at Blue beside Goku, having covered the distance from the compound in the 3 seconds it had taken Goku to deliver that assessment. He looked at the entity. The entity looked at him with the empty directional awareness of something that categorizes threats by gamma output, and had already determined that Vegeta did not register on that scale. It moved toward the Hulk again. Vegeta hit it from the side with a Kai blast that would have restructured the local geography if it had hit the ground instead, and the entity absorbed the impact, and the gamma output from its cellular structure increased in the same adaptive pattern the Hulk used, the same mechanic running without the banner component to moderate the escalation. It adapts too, Vegeta said. Same base biology, Bruce said. Same mechanics. Then hitting it harder makes it harder to hit, Vegeta said, and his voice carried the specific frustration of a man who has identified a problem that his primary skill set has just become counterproductive against. Yes, Bruce said, which means conventional engagement escalates it toward a level we do not want it to reach, Vegeta said. Yes, which means, Vegeta said, that you have to fight it, Bruce said, and you have to fight it in a way that doesn't escalate it, Vegeta said. Which means you cannot simply hit it as hard as you can, Bruce said. I have to fight it in a way that ends it without feeding it. Piccolo appeared beside Bruce, having crossed the distance in the pause that the exchange had created. He looked at the entity, which was currently in the process of disengaging from the combined interference of Goku and Vegeta, with the implacable focus of something that has one trajectory and cannot be argued out of it. Gamma sense, Piccolo said. It's tracking you specifically, the largest gamma signature. What happens if the signature becomes 2 instead of 1? Bruce looked at him. If the integration shifts forward, Piccolo said carefully. If Banner comes fully forward and the Hulk steps back, does the gamma signature split? Bruce and the Hulk ran this calculation simultaneously from their different angles, meeting at the same answer from opposite directions. No, Bruce said, the gamma signature is cellular. It doesn't change based on which of us is primary, we're the same body. Then it doesn't matter which of you fights it, Piccolo said. It matters, the Hulk said from inside with the quiet certainty of something speaking from experience rather than theory. Not for the tracking, for the fighting. Piccolo looked at Bruce. Entity was built to match the Hulk's power profile, Bruce said, translating. It was calibrated for the Hulk, a fighter. Anger-based escalation, adaptive cellular response, direct physical engagement. He paused. It was not calibrated for Banner. Piccolo was quiet for a moment. Banner doesn't fight like the Hulk, Piccolo said. No, Bruce said. Banner is a physicist. Something moved through Piccolo's expression that was the compressed version of recognizing a solution and respecting it simultaneously. The entity had cleared Goku and Vegeta's interference and was 30 meters away and closing. Bruce shifted the integration, not fully to Banner Primary, because the physical capability required the Hulk's structure. But the processing shifted, the way a transmission shifts, the same engine running a different gear. The Hulk's instinctive combat response stepped back, and Banner's analytical framework stepped forward, and the entity arrived at the engagement with its calibration intact, and found something it had not been calibrated for. A physicist in a gamma giant's body who was not angry, who was in fact the specific opposite of angry, who was watching it with the focused analytical attention of someone who had spent decades studying gamma radiation at every level from theoretical to catastrophically personal, and who was looking at this particular gamma entity the way he had always looked at problems that required understanding before addressing. The entity's first strike landed. The Hulk's cellular structure took it, and the adaptive response fired, and the gamma output increased, and Bruce felt the power rise with the specific internal awareness of someone who has been in this body long enough to know its responses at the level of sensation rather than measurement. He did not hit back. The entity hit him again, harder, the escalation beginning because the adaptive response in its structure read the Hulk's increased output as competitive threat and matched it. Bruce still did not hit back. Goku, watching from 40 meters away, understood what was happening approximately 3 seconds before anyone else in the field did, and his expression shifted through recognition into something more complex, the specific expression of a man who is watching someone do something very difficult in a way that looks very still. He's taking the hits, Krillin said, from behind the folding chair that had been relocated to a new position of strategic safety. He's reading it, Goku said. From inside the hits, Goku said. He's a scientist, he's running an experiment. He's letting it hit him to gather data, Vegeta said, and his voice had the quality it got when something produced an assessment he had not anticipated and that he was updating his model to include. He needs to know the specific frequency architecture of its adaptive response, Bruce said from the engagement zone, loudly enough to carry, because Banner talked through problems and the talking was part of the processing. The scan data shows the base cellular structure, but not the runtime frequency. The Hulk's adaptive response runs at a specific gamma frequency that varies with emotional input. If this entity has no emotional input, its adaptive response should run at a fixed frequency. He took another hit, the power rose further. The golden-green luminescence brightened. A fixed frequency, Bulma's voice came through the communicator, running the implication in real time, means a predictable ceiling. A predictable ceiling, Bruce said, means a specific absorption threshold. Entity hit him again with the specific escalation pattern of something that had been getting stronger with every exchange, and was beginning to approach the output level that the absorption of the gamma anomaly had produced in the Hulk. The ground around them had begun to disagree with itself in small ways. Cracks in the compressed earth, fine and radiating, the seismic response to 2 gamma-reactive systems operating at significant output in close proximity to each other. Banner, the Hulk said from inside with the urgency of something that has been patient but is reaching the edge of patience. The level is getting high. I know, Bruce said. Entity is approaching the threshold where its output affects tectonic stability. I know, 2 more hits. Bruce said. The next hit produced a visible shockwave. The hit after that produced a crater. and in the data that the two hits generated, Bruce found what he was looking for. The fixed frequency of the entity's adaptive response, running without emotional variation because there was no emotional component. A constant baseline that was the specific vulnerability that Frieza's engineers had not thought to address because they had been building something that mirrored the Hulk's power, without accounting for the possibility that the Hulk's opponent would be the Hulk himself, who knew exactly what a fixed gamma frequency felt like to absorb. Because the Hulk had been absorbing gamma radiation his entire existence. "Hulk," Bruce said. "Yes," the Hulk said, and came fully forward in the integration with the speed of someone who has been waiting and is ready, the balance shifting completely, the physicist stepping back and the fighter stepping forward, and the two of them cleaner in the transition than they had ever been. The new depth of integration making the shift not a handoff but a gear change in the same continuous system. The Hulk stopped taking hits. He absorbed the next one instead, not the physical impact. The gamma component, the specific fixed frequency of the entity's adaptive output, taken in through the Hulk's cellular structure the way the Hulk had always taken in gamma radiation, the foundational mechanic of his existence running at the precise frequency calibration that Bruce had spent 6 hits identifying. The entity registered the absorption as a power drain, its adaptive response fired to compensate. The output increased. The Hulk absorbed that too. The entity escalated again. The Hulk absorbed again. The cycle ran 4 times in 8 seconds, and the entity's power level began to drop because it was generating output faster than its biosynthetic cellular structure could replenish from its base charge. The adaptive response creating a drain that its engineers had not designed for because they had not designed for an opponent who could take the output directly rather than receiving it as damage. On the 5th cycle, the entity did something that its calibration had not included as a behavioral option, and that therefore should not have been possible. It stopped, not retreating, not disengaging. It stopped and stood in the cratered earth, and the specific empty intelligence of its tracking behavior was running and finding nothing useful, because the thing it was designed to match was now doing something outside the parameters of the match. It looked at the Hulk with the directionality of a compass needle that has found its north and cannot understand why north keeps moving. The Hulk looked back. The grief was still there. It had not gone anywhere during the engagement. It had been present underneath the analytical framework and the absorption strategy, and the 6 hits that had provided the data, sitting in the deep interior where the old things lived, the specific grief of looking at what you might have been. But grief was not the same as recognition, and recognition was not the same as identification. "You are not Hulk," the Hulk said. The entity did not respond. It did not have the architecture for response. "You have the power," the Hulk said. "You have the mechanics. You have everything that Banner and others spent years trying to separate from Hulk, because they thought those were the parts that mattered." His voice was level and careful in the way it was when he was saying something that was true and that he had earned the right to say. "But you do not have the reason. And without the reason, the power is just weight." He absorbed the final cycle of the entity's output. The entity's power level reached the depletion threshold. The biosynthetic cellular structure, without the biological history and accumulated resilience of the Hulk's actual body, without the decades of surviving things that should have been fatal, reached the limit of its engineered tolerance and held there, the adaptive response no longer able to compensate for the drain. It was not destroyed, it was empty. The tracking behavior, deprived of the gamma output it used to orient, went passive. The directionality that had pointed it toward the Hulk since the moment it came through the fracture simply stopped, the way a compass stops when the magnetic field is removed. The entity stood in the cratered earth, then it sat down, not a collapse, not a defeat, a cessation, something that had been running out of purpose rather than capacity and had arrived at the end of its purpose. The Hulk looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the sky, which was fully light now, the Thursday dawn that had arrived while they were dealing with what the night had produced, blue and unremarkable in the specific beautiful way of skis that don't know they're providing context. He sat down too. cross-legged in the cratered earth 20 meters from the thing that was and was not his reflection, and he was quiet. Bruce was quiet with him. Above them, at the edge of the atmosphere, a ship that had been holding a position of careful observation at the boundary of sensor range received a transmission from its captain's communications suite, and the captain read it, and the captain's expression did the thing it did when an operation had not produced its intended outcome, and the captain was already building the next approach, without allowing the current outcome to produce any visible response, except the small movement of a tail. The operation had not produced what Frieza wanted. The integration had held. The choosing had survived the reflection. He closed the transmission and looked at the data from the engagement and filed it with the thoroughness of someone for whom every outcome was information, and information was never wasted. Then he looked at the planet below and the specific density of significance it kept producing per square kilometer, and the entity sitting in the cratered earth, and the green giant sitting across from it in a posture that was not victory and was not defeat, and that contained something he did not have a category for in his operational vocabulary. He looked at it for a long time. His tail was completely still. On the ground below, Krillin walked across the cratered earth with his thermos and his folding chair, and arrived at the Hulk's position and set up the chair and sat in it and poured coffee into the thermos cap and held it out. The Hulk looked at it, looked at Krillin. "You know," Krillin said, nodding toward the entity sitting 20 meters away, "it's not your fault he built that." "Hulk knows," the Hulk said, "and it's not a failure that it came here," Krillin said. "You didn't ask to be pulled through a dimensional fracture. You didn't choose to have a gamma signature that a continental entity could track. You didn't design Frieza's anchor." "Hulk knows," the Hulk said. "I'm just saying," Krillin said, with the specific gentle directness of someone who has said important things to important people in quiet moments, and understands that the quiet moment is when they land, that looking at that and feeling something about it doesn't mean you are that. Hulk was quiet for a moment. "Banner says the same thing," the Hulk said. "Banner's smart," Krillin said. "Yes," the Hulk said. And then, after a pause that contained the end of something and the beginning of something else, "Thank you, Krillin." It was the first time the Hulk had used his name unprompted. Krillin looked at the thermos cap, then back at the Hulk, and something moved through his expression that was not performed and was not complicated and was exactly what it was. "Anytime," he said. The entity remained on the ground, passive and empty and no longer a threat, and the morning continued around it with the indifference of mornings, and somewhere in the layer of events that were going to require addressing, the question of what came next was waiting with the patience of questions that know they will be answered when the moment is right. But that was the next moment. This moment was a Thursday morning in a cratered sparring ground with coffee and a thermos cap, and the specific quality of silence that exists between people who have been through something and are allowed to be on the other side of it for a little while before the next thing arrives. Both of them together. "Banner," the Hulk said from inside with the urgency of something that has been patient but is reaching the edge of patience. "The level is getting high." "I know," Bruce said. "Entity is approaching the threshold where its output affects tectonic stability." "I know, 2 more hits." Bruce said. The next hit produced a visible shockwave, the hit after that produced a crater, and in the data that the 2 hits generated, Bruce found what he was looking for. The fixed frequency of the entity's adaptive response, running without emotional variation because there was no emotional component. A constant baseline that was the specific vulnerability that Frieza's engineers had not thought to address because they had been building something that mirrored the Hulk's power, without accounting for the possibility that the Hulk's opponent would be the Hulk himself, who knew exactly what a fixed gamma frequency felt like to absorb. Because the Hulk had been absorbing gamma radiation his entire existence. "Hulk," Bruce said. "Yes," the Hulk said, and came fully forward in the integration with the speed of someone who has been waiting and is ready, the balance shifting completely, the physicist stepping back and the fighter stepping forward, and the 2 of them cleaner in the transition than they had ever been. The new depth of integration making the shift not a handoff but a gear change in the same continuous system. The Hulk stopped taking hits. He absorbed the next one instead, not the physical impact. The gamma component, the specific fixed frequency of the entity's adaptive output, taken in through the Hulk's cellular structure the way the Hulk had always taken in gamma radiation, the foundational mechanic of his existence running at the precise frequency calibration that Bruce had spent 6 hits identifying. The entity registered the absorption as a power drain, its adaptive response fired to compensate. The output increased. The Hulk absorbed that too. The entity escalated again. The Hulk absorbed again. The cycle ran 4 times in 8 seconds, and the entity's power level began to drop because it was generating output faster than its biosynthetic cellular structure could replenish from its base charge. The adaptive response creating a drain that its engineers had not designed for because they had not designed for an opponent who could take the output directly rather than receiving it as damage. On the 5th cycle, the entity did something that its calibration had not included as a behavioral option, and that therefore should not have been possible. It stopped, not retreating, not disengaging. It stopped and stood in the cratered earth, and the specific empty intelligence of its tracking behavior was running and finding nothing useful, because the thing it was designed to match was now doing something outside the parameters of the match. It looked at the Hulk with the directionality of a compass needle that has found its north and cannot understand why north keeps moving. The Hulk looked back. The grief was still there. It had not gone anywhere during the engagement. It had been present underneath the analytical framework and the absorption strategy, and the 6 hits that had provided the data, sitting in the deep interior where the old things lived, the specific grief of looking at what you might have been. But grief was not the same as recognition, and recognition was not the same as identification. You are not Hulk, the Hulk said. The entity did not respond. It did not have the architecture for response. You have the power, the Hulk said. You have the mechanics. You have everything that Banner and others spent years trying to separate from Hulk, because they thought those were the parts that mattered. His voice was level and careful in the way it was when he was saying something that was true and that he had earned the right to say. But you do not have the reason. And without the reason, the power is just weight. He absorbed the final cycle of the entity's output. The entity's power level reached the depletion threshold. The biosynthetic cellular structure, without the biological history and accumulated resilience of the Hulk's actual body, without the decades of surviving things that should have been fatal, reached the limit of its engineered tolerance and held there, the adaptive response no longer able to compensate for the drain. It was not destroyed, it was empty. The tracking behavior, deprived of the gamma output it used to orient, went passive. The directionality that had pointed it toward the Hulk since the moment it came through the fracture simply stopped, the way a compass stops when the magnetic field is removed. The entity stood in the cratered earth, then it sat down, not a collapse, not a defeat, a cessation, something that had been running out of purpose rather than capacity and had arrived at the end of its purpose. The Hulk looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the sky, which was fully light now, the Thursday dawn that had arrived while they were dealing with what the night had produced, blue and unremarkable in the specific beautiful way of skis that don't know they're providing context. He sat down too, cross-legged in the cratered earth, 20 meters from the thing that was and was not his reflection, and he was quiet. Bruce was quiet with him. Above them, at the edge of the atmosphere, a ship that had been holding a position of careful observation at the boundary of sensor range received a transmission from its captain's communications suite, and the captain read it, and the captain's expression did the thing it did when an operation had not produced its intended outcome, and the captain was already building the next approach, without allowing the current outcome to produce any visible response, except the small movement of a tail. The operation had not produced what Frieza wanted. The integration had held. The choosing had survived the reflection. He closed the transmission and looked at the data from the engagement and filed it with the thoroughness of someone for whom every outcome was information, and information was never wasted. Then he looked at the planet below, and the specific density of significance it kept producing per square kilometer, and the entity sitting in the cratered earth, and the green giant sitting across from it in a posture that was not victory, and was not defeat, and that contained something he did not have a category for in his operational vocabulary. He looked at it for a long time. His tail was completely still. On the ground below, Krillin walked across the cratered earth with his thermos and his folding chair, and arrived at the Hulk's position and set up the chair and sat in it and poured coffee into the thermos cap and held it out. The Hulk looked at it, looked at Krillin. "You know," Krillin said, nodding toward the entity sitting 20 meters away, "it's not your fault he built that." "Hulk knows," the Hulk said, "and it's not a failure that it came here," Krillin said. "You didn't ask to be pulled through a dimensional fracture. You didn't choose to have a gamma signature that a continental entity could track. You didn't design Frieza's anchor." "Hulk knows," the Hulk said. "I'm just saying," Krillin said, with the specific gentle directness of someone who has said important things to important people in quiet moments, and understands that the quiet moment is when they land, that looking at that and feeling something about it doesn't mean you are that. Hulk was quiet for a moment. "Banner says the same thing," the Hulk said. "Banner's smart," Krillin said. "Yes," the Hulk said. And then, after a pause that contained the end of something and the beginning of something else, "Thank you, Krillin." It was the first time the Hulk had used his name unprompted. Krillin looked at the thermos cap, then back at the Hulk, and something moved through his expression that was not performed and was not complicated and was exactly what it was. "Anytime," he said. The entity remained on the ground, passive and empty and no longer a threat, and the morning continued around it with the indifference of mornings. And somewhere in the layer of events that were going to require addressing, the question of what came next was waiting with the patience of questions that know they will be answered when the moment is right. But that was the next moment. This moment was a Thursday morning in a cratered sparring ground with coffee and a thermos cap, and the specific quality of silence that exists between people who have been through something and are allowed to be on the other side of it for a little while before the next thing arrives. Both of them together. Frieza came down at noon, not with a fleet, not with operatives or anchors or biosynthetic constructs or any of the layered infrastructure of his operational approach. He came down alone, descending through the atmosphere with the unhurried precision of something that had decided the intermediary phase was concluded, and the direct phase had arrived, his golden form cutting through the cloud layer above the sparring ground, and arriving at ground level with the specific quality of presence that 400 years of absolute authority produces in a being that has never genuinely questioned whether it belongs everywhere it goes. He landed 30 meters from the Hulk. He looked at the passive entity sitting in the cratered earth, at the coffee thermos, at Krillin, who had gone very still in his folding chair with the specific stillness of someone who has survived enough encounters with extinction-level threats to know that the survival rate correlates strongly with not making sudden movements. He looked at the Hulk. "Impressive," Frieza said. He was not performing the word. He was using it with the specific precision of someone for whom language was a tool with tolerances and who did not waste good tooling on bad fits. The absorption strategy, the fixed frequency identification, the 6 hits to generate sufficient data. He tilted his head. "Banner's work, I assume." The Hulk would have simply hit it until something resolved. "Would have figured it out," the Hulk said. "Together," Frieza said with the specific inflection of someone making a word carry more weight than its syllables suggest. "Yes, that's rather the point, isn't it?" He looked at the entity again. "I underestimated the integration depth. The anomaly absorption should have pushed you past the coherence threshold. Most integrated beings at that power level lose the secondary component. The anchor element gets consumed by the primary." He paused. "You didn't lose Banner." "No," the Hulk said. "Why not?" The Hulk was quiet for a moment. "Because Banner is not the anchor element," the Hulk said. "Banner is not the secondary component. That framing is wrong. We are not primary and secondary. We are," he searched for the word in the space between what he knew and what he had not yet said aloud. "We are a system, both load-bearing. Remove either one and the structure fails." He looked at Frieza with the patient, exhausted steadiness of someone who has explained something many times and has not lost the willingness to explain it once more. You built something that had the power without the system. That is why it is sitting in the dirt. Frieza looked at the entity for a long moment. He said. And then, because Frieza was always most dangerous when he was being honest, I am going to kill you now. Hulk stood up. Hulk knows, the Hulk said. Goku was already there, which was to say Goku had been there for the past 4 minutes and had been maintaining a position of respectful non-interference while the conversation ran because Goku understood, with the specific social intelligence that operated independently of, and sometimes in spite of his other intelligences, that some conversations needed to complete before the fighting started. He was standing 20 meters to Frieza's left in a posture that communicated readiness without aggression, which was a difficult combination to achieve and which Goku achieved without apparent effort, because for Goku it was not a combination but a single state. You don't have to do this, Goku said. I know, Frieza said pleasantly. That's what makes it a choice. He looked at Goku with the specific look he reserved for Goku, the one that contained the full complex history of their particular relationship, the layered resentment and the grudging respect, and the deep specific irritation of someone who has been defeated by the same person multiple times and cannot stop finding it surprising. You're going to fight me, Goku said. You understand that I've been preparing specifically for this engagement since the last one, Frieza said. The time in the hyperbolic time chamber equivalents available to Planet Trade Organization research has produced developments. I figured, Goku said, you always have developments. You always have transformations, Frieza said. I find us exhausting, Kakarot. Then stop coming back, Goku said, without heat, without victory, simply as an honest observation. You know I can't, Frieza said. Yeah, Goku said, I know. Vegeta landed 30 meters to Frieza's right with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been positioning since Frieza entered the atmosphere, reading the tactical geometry of the space with the instinctive expertise of someone who had grown up, understanding this kind of geometry as a survival requirement. Frieza looked at Vegeta. The look between them was the look it had always been, which was not simple and had never been simple and would not become simple today, but which had shifted over the decades and the deaths and the resurrections into something that was not the same as what it had started as, even if neither of them would have named what it had become. Vegeta, Frieza said. Frieza, Vegeta said, with the specific inflection that made the title a mark of history rather than a gesture of current respect. You look well, Frieza said. You look the same, Vegeta said. You always look the same. It's one of my better qualities, Frieza said. Piccolo arrived at the eastern edge of the crater perimeter. Gohan landed beside him. The geometry of the space had organized itself in the way it always organized around Frieza, the Z-Fighters finding their positions with the muscle memory of people who had done this before and understood that the positions mattered. Krillin folded his chair. He did not leave. He folded the chair and moved to a position of calculated strategic distance, and stood there with his arms at his sides and the thermos in one hand, and the specific quality of presence that Krillin brought to these moments, which was not the presence of someone who could be decisive at the power levels involved, but was absolutely the presence of someone who had decided to be here, and was going to be here regardless of what the levels were. The Hulk noted it. He noted it the way you note a thing that has become reliable, with the specific warmth of reliability rather than the brightness of surprise. Frieza powered up. The energy release was different from the last time. Not just in magnitude, though the magnitude was different, significantly different, the 6 weeks and the Planet Trade Organization's research capacity having produced exactly what Frieza had promised. The character of it was different, more controlled, more structured. The specific difference between a power that is being wielded and a power that is being deployed, the distinction between improvisation and preparation. He had been working on this. Goku felt the Kai signature reach its new plateau, and his expression did the thing it did when something had arrived that required full attention and honest assessment, rather than the reflexive competitive excitement of his first response to new power levels. This was not reflexive, competitive excitement. This was full attention and honest assessment. "He's stronger than the last time," Goku said to Vegeta quietly. "I noticed," Vegeta said. "A lot stronger." "I noticed that too," Vegeta said. Frieza smiled at the exchange, not the performed smile, the real one, which was smaller and rarer and more genuinely dangerous because it arrived when something was actually going the way he intended. "Shall we?" Frieza said. What followed was not a fight in the conventional sense, not the exchange and escalation structure that characterized most of the battles at this level. It was several fights happening simultaneously in the same space, the geometry of the engagement splitting into distinct dynamics that overlapped and influenced each other without ever fully merging. Goku and Frieza moved to the upper air immediately, their exchange carrying them out of the ground-level space with the mutual instinct of two people who have fought each other enough times to know exactly how much room they need. The displaced air from their first contact rolled across the sparring ground like a weather event, flattening everything within range that wasn't actively resisting the pressure. Vegeta went after Frieza's support, because Frieza had come down alone but had not come down without preparation. The ship in the upper atmosphere having deployed a network of interference drones during the descent, Kai-dampening technology that Bulma had been tracking, and that Vegeta had already assessed as his specific problem to address. Piccolo and Gohan held the perimeter, because the perimeter needed holding and those two were the most efficient perimeter holders available, and they both understood this without it needing to be said, which left the Hulk, and Frieza had planned for that too. The first of them came from the west, not planet trade soldiers. Something more specific, a detachment of specialized combatants from a species the Planet Trade Organization had been cultivating for exactly this application. Beings whose natural ability was Kai disruption at close range, who operated by getting inside a fighter's personal space and degrading the coherence of their energy output from within the field rather than attacking it from outside. There were 12 of them. The Hulk looked at 12 beings who had been sent specifically to disrupt his integration from close range, and made the specific assessment that any experienced fighter makes when they recognize the tactic being employed against them. He was not going to be able to fight all 12 without spending significant power and triggering the adaptive escalation cycle that would push his output toward levels that became problematic for the geography. He was also not going to be able to ignore them because their disruption field at close range was already affecting the golden-green luminescence of the post-absorption integration in ways that Bruce could feel from inside as a kind of static in the joint processing, not damaging yet but present, a warning of what sustained exposure would produce. The Hulk thought. This was, in the specific vocabulary of the Hulk's fighting history, unusual. The Hulk in the early years had not thought during fights. He had responded. The thinking had come later as the integration deepened, as Banner's framework became more consistently accessible rather than periodically available. Now the thinking happened at the speed of the fighting, the analysis running in parallel with the response rather than before or after it. The 12 disruption specialists were arranged in a formation designed to converge, to close the distance from multiple vectors simultaneously, and establish the disruption field at range before full close-range effectiveness was achieved. The formation had a specific gap at the eastern edge, not an accident. A design gap meant to channel the target toward the eastern vector where the terrain offered less cover and the disruption field's density was highest. The Hulk moved west. Through the thinnest point of the formation rather than the engineered gap, with the speed that the post-absorption integration provided, the Gamma-Chi hybrid power level expressing itself in movement that was not what the 12 disruption specialists had calibrated their formation to handle, because they had calibrated for the Hulk's pre-absorption speed profile, and the post-absorption profile was different. He went through the western edge before the formation could compensate, and the disruption field collapsed without its anchor points, and the 12 specialists, who were professional and competent, and had simply been given a target that exceeded their briefing parameters, made the correct decision with commendable speed. They withdrew. Somewhere above the clouds, Goku and Frieza were trading exchanges that were restructuring the local weather patterns. The displaced energy from their contact points was producing visible aurora effects at mid-atmosphere. Kai and the new development in Frieza's power creating interference patterns that Bulma's instruments were recording with the focused attention of a scientist watching something unprecedented and wanting complete documentation. The new development in Frieza's power was the thing that was taking Goku's full attention. It was not a transformation in the visible sense. No change in color or aura or physical form. It was a refinement, the specific result of someone spending 6 weeks working on one thing and only one thing with access to the best available resources. Frieza had taken his existing power and compressed it, tightened its expression, reduced the energy expenditure per unit of output in a way that meant he was running at maximum effectiveness with a significantly lower burn rate than any previous version. He could sustain this. That was the development, not more power, more sustainable power. Goku had fought Frieza many times across many configurations, and had always had time working in his favor because Frieza's maximum output was also his maximum sustainable output, and eventually the maximum ran into its own limits. This version did not run into its own limits at the same rate. Goku went to Ultra Instinct Sign at the 3-minute mark. Silver edges appearing at the aura's boundary, the specific indicator of the state approaching but not yet achieved, the body beginning to operate ahead of conscious direction in the narrow specific domain of combat movement, anticipating rather than responding. Frieza noted it. "There it is," Frieza said, not pausing in the exchange. "I wondered when. You've been timing me," Goku said. "Been studying you," Frieza said. "There's a difference. You reach sign at approximately 3 minutes against maximum opposition. Autonomous at approximately 6 to 8 depending on the quality of the engagement. I have a window." "A window for what?" Goku said. "The other part of the plan," Frieza said. The second wave hit the ground level not from the west but from directly above, dropping through the cloud layer in the specific window that Frieza's engagement with Goku had opened in the Z-Fighter's attention distribution. Not disruption specialists this time. Retrieval units heavy class, equipped with containment technology that was several generations beyond the Class 4 field that the Galactic Patrol had deployed on day 1. They were not going for the Hulk, they were going for Bruce Banner. The distinction mattered in a way that Frieza had understood since reading the psychological profile. The Hulk could not be contained. This had been demonstrated conclusively, but Bruce Banner was not the Hulk in isolation. He was half of a system, and a system has leverage points that its components don't have individually. If you could not take the weapon, you could take the reason the weapon chose not to fire. Piccolo saw them before anyone else, because Piccolo's antennae were calibrated for exactly this kind of incoming, and because Piccolo had been expecting Frieza to have more angles than were currently visible, and had been watching for the ones that weren't. He moved. Piccolo moving at full speed was not something that most beings in any universe had the sensory apparatus to track accurately. He arrived at the first retrieval unit's position before the unit had completed its descent arc, and he did not engage it gently because gentleness was not the language the situation required. The first unit became debris. The second unit adjusted its approach based on the debris, and Piccolo adjusted his position based on the adjustment, and Gohan came in from the eastern perimeter. Because Piccolo and Gohan did not need to communicate to coordinate, they had the specific synchronization of a relationship built through the most direct possible forms of shared experience. 6 of the 8 retrieval units became debris, 2 broke through. The Hulk felt the disruption in the integration before he consciously processed the threat, the specific warning sensation of something moving toward the banner component directly, and he turned with the speed that the post-absorption integration made available, and he was fast, but the 2 units that had broken through had been designed with the Hulk's post-absorption speed profile in the data, because Frieza had been thorough and they were faster. The containment field deployed at close range. It hit the integration sideways, not the full envelopment it had been designed for because the Hulk's turn had changed the geometry, but it hit the resonance layer of the golden-green luminescence with the specific frequency it had been calibrated for, and the effect on the integration was immediate and not theoretical. The processing split, not completely, not the full disconnection that the field had been designed to produce. But the thinner membrane that the past weeks had developed at the integration's depth, the quality that made their joint processing faster and more coherent, thinned further under the field's effect, and the gap that opened was narrow and did not last long and in ordinary circumstances would have been manageable. In ordinary circumstances, Bruce Banner was not simultaneously managing the physical response to a containment field, while the Hulk's anger at the containment field was producing the specific feedback loop that always happened when something tried to put them in a box. The anger escalated, the adaptive response fired. The gamma output spiked to a level that the amplifier's bandwidth rated above Worldbreaker baseline was designed to handle, and the amplifier handled it, but the power that was being channeled was approaching the upper boundary of the rated tolerance, and Bruce was aware of this from inside in the way you are aware of a structural limit from inside the structure. "No," the Hulk said from inside with the urgency that was not panic because the Hulk did not panic, but that was the functional equivalent of it in the Hulk's emotional vocabulary. "I know," Bruce said. "Field is, I know," Bruce said. "Don't escalate." "Hulk is trying not to escalate," the Hulk said with the specific strained quality of someone who is doing something very difficult and is not sure they can sustain it. "No, you are," Bruce said. "Keep trying." Anger wanted somewhere to go. This was the core of the problem, and had always been the core of the problem, and all the integration work, and all the 43 days, and all the garden mornings and the board games with Krillin, had not changed the fundamental reality that the anger wanted somewhere to go, and when something tried to put them in a box, the somewhere was everywhere. The Worldbreaker threshold was not a decision point, it was a pressure point. A place where the anger exceeded the decision-making capacity of the system, and the system defaulted to its oldest instruction, which was simply to be as large as the anger required, and let the geography sort itself out. The ground was cracking, fine cracks radiating from the Hulk's position, the seismic response to a power output that was pressing against the rated tolerance of both the amplifier and the integration's own coherence architecture. Krillin moved toward it. This was objectively not the tactically sound decision. The tactically sound decision for a person of Krillin's power level, when a being of the Hulk's current output was approaching a destabilization threshold, was to increase the distance between them significantly and rapidly. Krillin knew this. Krillin had enough tactical experience to know this the way he knew his own Kai signature. Automatically and completely, he moved toward it anyway. He crossed the cracked ground with the specific quality of movement that belongs to people who have decided that a thing needs doing and have removed the question of whether from the operating stack, leaving only the how and the when, and in this case both of those were immediately. He stopped 3 meters from the Hulk. The gamma output at this range was producing visible heat shimmer in the air. The golden-green luminescence was bright enough to cast shadows. The ground beneath Krillin's feet was vibrating with the continuous low frequency of something very large and very powerful, trying very hard not to be as large and powerful as it currently was. Krillin said. The Hulk looked at him. The containment field was still partially active, degraded by the Hulk's output but not fully overcome, running its disruption frequency against the integration's resonance layer with the persistence of a device that had been built to work, and was working within its design parameters even if those parameters had not anticipated this specific power level. "Krillin," the Hulk said, and his voice was an octave below its normal register and the air vibrated with it. "Move back," Krillin said. "Output level, I know what the output level is," Krillin said. "Bulma's instruments are very loud and she has speakers." He looked up at the Hulk with the specific directness he had been deploying since the first day in the kitchen when he had asked the Hulk his name. "Look at me." "At me," Krillin said, and his voice was steady in the way voices are steady when the person using them has decided that steadiness is not optional. Not at the containment field, not at the ground. Not at whatever Frieza is doing up there. At me. Hulk looked at Krillin 3 meters away, small and bald and holding a thermos with both hands because the ground was vibrating, and he was compensating for the vibration rather than stepping back from it, standing in the heat shimmer of a gamma output that was approaching geological consequence with the specific quality of presence that Krillin brought to things he had decided to be present for. Going to be okay, Krillin said. The level is, you are going to be okay, Krillin said again, with the patient certainty of someone repeating a true thing rather than reasserting a debated one. Because you've been okay before when it was this high. You were okay when you absorbed the anomaly. You were okay when Frieza hit you at 100%. You were okay every time this has gotten to this level because you and Banner have been choosing the whole time and you're still choosing right now. He paused. I can see it, the choosing. It's still there. Hulk was very still. The gamma output held. It did not climb. It did not climb because something in the specific quality of Krillin's 3-meter proximity certainty had provided what the integration needed in this moment, which was not more power or a better tactical position or a higher rated amplifier. What it needed was a witness. Someone standing in the output and not flinching and not running and not reaching for a containment device and seeing both of them, the green giant and the physicist and the system they had built together, and saying clearly and without agenda that the system was still working. The containment field degraded under a focused pulse from the Hulk's cellular structure, not an escalation, a precision, the specific gamma frequency of the field's disruption signal identified and countered with the targeted accuracy that Banner's physics and the Hulk's cellular sensitivity made possible working in combination. The field collapsed. The integration's resonance layer stabilized. The golden-green luminescence settled back to its post-absorption baseline, still bright, still structured, but no longer pressing against the amplifier's rated ceiling. The ground stopped cracking. Bruce Banner breathed. Above them, at the 6-minute mark, Goku reached autonomous Ultra Instinct. It was not a gradual arrival. It arrived the way it always did, completely and without intermediate steps, the silver resolving to a different quality of light, the aura settling into the specific stillness that characterized the state, and the expression on Goku's face shifting from the focused effort of Ultra Instinct sign to the empty serenity of the autonomous version. Not empty of intention, but empty of interference. The body operating without the friction of conscious direction. Frieza saw it, and his expression produced something that moved too fast to categorize. Then he produced his development, not a new form. A new configuration of his existing power, the refinement he had spent 6 weeks achieving, restructured in the moment of Goku's autonomous Ultra Instinct emergence into a specific counter-architecture that he had designed for exactly this window. He had spent 6 weeks learning how to fight Ultra Instinct specifically, not match it. He could not match it and he knew it, and he had the specific intelligence to design around what he could not match rather than toward it. He had designed a fighting style that operated in the spaces Ultra Instinct did not cover, that accepted the body's perfect defensive movement as a given, and built its attack geometry around the spaces that perfect defensive movement necessarily created. He had done the work. Goku felt it immediately. The new configuration did not operate the way any previous Frieza configuration had operated, and Ultra Instinct was calibrated against patterns, and this was a pattern it had not been calibrated for. The body's automatic response was present and functional, but was operating slightly behind the engagement geometry for the first time since the state had been achieved. Frieza was not winning, but he was not losing. He was, for the first time in the history of their specific relationship, competing. You did the homework, Goku said. I always do the homework, Frieza said, and his voice had the specific quality of someone doing something genuinely difficult at the edge of their capability and finding it, against all aristocratic instinct, satisfying. They went back and forth for 4 minutes that produced damage assessments that Bulma's instruments would spend the next week processing, energy release events that would show up in the astronomical record as anomalous readings from the system's outer planets, displays of sustained high-level combat that were witnessed from the ground by a small bald man with a thermos who watched with the expression of someone who had attended enough of these to appreciate the craft. At the 4-minute mark, Goku made a decision. It was not a tactical decision in the conventional sense. It was the kind of decision that Ultra Instinct made possible but did not make automatically, because the state removed interference from the body's response but did not remove the person from the body, and the person still had to decide. He stopped countering. He simply stopped countering Frieza's attacks and stood in the engagement geometry without defensive movement, and let the new configuration connect, and the impacts hit with the specific force of 6 weeks of preparation and refinement applied to a stationary target. Frieza stopped. This was not in the briefing. "What are you doing?" Frieza said. "Taking the hits," Goku said. "I can see that." "Why?" "Because I want you to see something," Goku said. He looked at Frieza with the expression he wore when he was being as serious as he got, which was not the combat serious of Ultra Instinct, but the personal serious of Goku himself, the man underneath the transformations. "You've been trying to win for 6 weeks. You built the anchor. You sent the anomaly. You designed the biosynthetic entity. You developed a counter to Ultra Instinct specifically." He paused. "That's a lot of work." "I am aware of the quantity of work," Frieza said. "It didn't work," Goku said. "It is in the process of." "It didn't work," Goku said, gently but without softness. "The Hulk absorbed the anomaly. The entity is sitting in the dirt. The integration held. The containment field failed. And right now you're hitting me and I'm letting you, and it's not changing anything." He looked at Frieza with the specific honest directness that was Goku's most consistent quality across every situation regardless of the power level at which the situation was occurring. At some point the question stops being "can you win?" and starts being "what do you actually want?" Frieza stared at him. "You are," Frieza said, with the specific precision of someone choosing a word very carefully, "infuriating." "I know," Goku said. "You are asking me to examine my motivations in the middle of a combat engagement." Goku said, "That is not how combat engagements work." "Of them don't," Goku agreed. "But ours kind of always have." Frieza was very still in the upper air. His tail was moving. The slow, deliberate movement of someone thinking rather than reacting, processing something that had arrived at the level where processing took time rather than the level where it was automatic. Below them, on the ground, the Hulk was watching. Bruce was watching with him. "He's not going to stop," the Hulk said from inside. "Not today. He doesn't have the architecture for stopping yet," Bruce said. "But Goku planted something," the Hulk said. "Goku is good at that. Plants things and then he doesn't make a big deal of them and he just waits," Bruce said. "And eventually the thing he planted grows into something the other person thought they arrived at themselves." "That is very sophisticated," the Hulk said. "He has no idea he's doing it," Bruce said. The Hulk made the sound, a small quiet laugh that had gotten less rusty with practice. Frieza looked down at the ground at the Hulk, at the integration's golden-green luminescence visible from this altitude as a faint structured glow in the crater field. And his expression did something that his expression rarely did, which was show more than one thing at once. "I want it," Frieza said. Not to Goku, to the air, an admission in the vocabulary of someone who had not made many admissions in 400 years. Not the power, not the weapon, the thing itself, the system. "The choosing, as your colleague would say." "Choosing," Goku said. "I have had power for 400 years, Frieza said. "I have never had the specific thing that makes power worth having." He looked at Goku. "You know what I mean, don't pretend you don't." "People," Goku said. "Purpose," Frieza said. "The specific difference between power that exists and power that is for something." He was quiet for a moment, with the specific weight of a being making an honest assessment of itself under difficult conditions. "I looked at the integration, and I wanted to break it because I cannot replicate it, and I cannot purchase it, and I cannot take it, and everything I cannot take I have historically broken so that no one else has it either." Upper air was very still. Goku looked at Frieza for a long time. You could try building it, Goku said, instead of breaking it. That, Frieza said, with the precise economy of someone who is being honest about a difficulty rather than dismissing it, would take considerably longer than 6 weeks. Yeah, Goku said, it usually does. Frieza looked at the ground again, at the passive entity, at the closed fracture coordinates, at the Hulk standing in the crater field with the golden-green luminescence and the small bald human 3 meters away who had apparently decided proximity was more important than safety and who had apparently been right about that. This is not finished, Frieza said. I know, Goku said, but I am going, Frieza said. Today. Okay, Goku said. Don't mistake this for anything other than a strategic reassessment. I won't, Goku said. But I reserve the right to be glad about it anyway. Frieza looked at him for a moment with an expression that landed somewhere between contempt and exhaustion, and something else that had no name in his operational vocabulary. Then he went upward through the cloud layer, toward the ship that was already beginning its departure sequence, with the unhurried pace that was his specific form of saving face, and that everyone present allowed him, because the outcome had already been determined, and pressing it further served no one's actual interests. The ship left the atmosphere. The upper air settled back to its ordinary business of being the upper air, clouds reorganizing around the absence of the engagement that had been using them as props, whether returning to its natural patterns, the aurora effects from the Kai interference fading as the energy dissipated. Below, on the ground, nobody moved for a long moment. Then Goku dropped out of Ultra Instinct and descended from the upper air, and landed in the crater field with the easy grace of someone for whom landing was simply the end of a thought about altitude. He walked to where the Hulk was standing. He looked at him with the expression that had been present since the first crater, direct and simple and entirely without agenda. You okay? Goku said. The Hulk looked at Goku, then at the sky where Frieza had been. Then at the ground where the entity was sitting, passive and empty, its tracking behavior fully dormant, just a presence in the crater field that was going to require a decision about what came next. Then at Krillin, who was sitting in his folded chair that he had apparently redeployed at some point during the engagement, drinking coffee with the settled energy of someone who had been where he needed to be and was now being somewhere comfortable. The integration was stable. The post-absorption depth was intact. The choosing was present and operational, and had survived the containment field and the disruption specialists and the reflected mirror and Frieza's 400 years of practiced leverage. And it was still the same choosing it had always been, aimed at the same things for the same reasons. Yeah, Bruce said. Yeah, the Hulk said, both of them, same word, same moment, same answer. The debrief took 2 hours and produced 11 different documents. Bulma generated most of them herself, working through the afternoon with the systematic efficiency of someone who understood that the paperwork of impossible events was not bureaucratic obligation, but institutional memory, the record that allowed future people dealing with similar situations to start from a point further along than zero. She documented the anchor's construction, its collection network, the node distribution pattern, the specific frequency architecture of the dimensional breach it had produced. She documented the biosynthetic entity's power profile, the fixed frequency vulnerability that Bruce had identified through 6 hits of deliberate data collection, the absorption methodology that had depleted it. She documented the integration depth. That file was the longest one and the most carefully written, because what had happened to Bruce and the Hulk during the anomaly absorption and the containment field engagement and the sustained pressure of the past 4 days was not just a record of a battle. It was a record of something that had not existed before this specific sequence of events had produced it. A power profile and a psychological architecture, and a system coherence that had no precedent in either universe, and that she wanted described accurately so that future understanding of it started from accurate premises. She wrote it for Bruce as much as for the record. He read it when she finished, sitting at the secondary workstation in the lab that had become his workstation over the past 6 weeks, and he read it with the focused attention he gave to things that required honest assessment, and when he finished he sat quietly for a moment. "You described the integration correctly," he said. "I know," Bulma said. "I had good data." "You described Banner correctly," he said. "The role, the function, the way it interacts with the Hulk's output." He paused. "Most people describe Banner as the container and the Hulk as the content. You described us as a joint system. Because that's what you are," Bulma said. "The container content model was always wrong. The scan data made that clear from day one." She looked at her display. "A container doesn't load bear, you do, both of you." Bruce was quiet for a moment. "Bulma," he said, the dimensional model. Now that the fracture is fully closed and the anchor is dormant." He paused. "What does it tell you about reopening the breach? A controlled reopening?" "Two-way." Bulma was already pulling up the model before he finished the sentence, because she had been anticipating this question for the past 3 days and had the relevant data pre-organized. "Theoretically viable," she said. "The fracture closed naturally, which means the membrane is intact on both sides. Controlled reopening would require a different approach from Frieza's anchor, something that works with the membrane's natural geometry rather than forcing it." She brought up a schematic. "I've been working on a design, a resonance generator rather than a force anchor, something that finds the membrane's existing stress points and opens along them rather than tearing new ones." Bruce looked at the schematic. "Long," he said. "Prototype in 3 weeks, Bulma said. "Functional device in 6. She paused. "If I have a collaborator who understands gamma radiation physics from the inside." Bruce looked at her. She looked back with the specific directness of someone who has made an offer and is waiting for the response without performing anything about the waiting. 6 weeks, Bruce said. "Give or take," Bulma said. Bruce looked at the schematic for a long moment. At the elegant resonance architecture, the way it worked with the membrane rather than against it, the specific engineering intelligence of something designed by someone who had understood from the beginning that the membrane was not an obstacle but a medium. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you'll collaborate," Bulma said. "Or okay, general acknowledgement of what I said." "Okay, I'll collaborate," Bruce said. Bulma turned back to her display with the specific quality of someone who is satisfied and is not going to make a production of the satisfaction because the work itself is the satisfaction and everything else is just noise. "Good," she said. "I'll set up a joint workstation. I'm already at the secondary. A better one," she said. The entity remained a question for 3 days. It sat in the crater field where the absorption had left it, passive and depleted, its tracking behavior dormant, its biosynthetic cellular structure running at maintenance level without the charge that had powered its operational state. It was not dangerous. Bulma's instruments confirmed this hourly with the thoroughness of someone who was not taking anything for granted. It was not recovering. The depletion was complete, and the biosynthetic structure lacked the biological history that allowed the Hulk cells to rebuild from equivalent states. It was simply present, requiring a decision. The decision was made on day 3, not by committee or formal discussion, but in the specific way that decisions sometimes get made in groups of people who have been through things together, which is that someone says the obvious thing at the right moment, and the room confirms it without needing to deliberate. Krillin said it. He said it while they were all at the long table for lunch on day 3, eating Kaikai's food and having the kind of conversation that happens when a group of people who have collectively survived something are in the first days of the after, and the after feels different from what came before in ways that are still being identified. He said, "We should keep it here." Everyone looked at him. "Permanently," Krillin said. "Not forever, just until we figure out what it needs." Because it came here through a forced breach, and it didn't choose that any more than the Hulk chose to be here on day 1. And we didn't leave the Hulk in the crater. Silence. It has no cognition, Piccolo said. It cannot make choices. It cannot develop. It is not the same situation. It's a gamma-reactive entity with no home and no charge and nowhere to go, Krillin said. That's enough to be worth figuring out. He shrugged in the way he shrugged when he had said something he meant, and was not going to qualify it into something smaller. "Just me." Bruce looked at the table. The Hulk looked with him. "Just you," Bruce said. The entity was relocated from the crater field to a contained area in the northern section of the Capsule Corporation, compound that Bulma adapted for its specific requirements over 2 days, with the brisk efficiency of someone who had adapted spaces for unusual inhabitants before and had developed a general methodology for it. She built a monitoring network into the space, calibrated for the biosynthetic cellular signature. That would alert her if the charge level changed in any direction. She named the monitoring file Banner 2, which was not sentimental because Bulma was not sentimental about naming conventions, but which was accurate, and accuracy was what she was always after. Bruce visited on the 4th day. He stood in the contained space and looked at the entity, and the entity did nothing because the entity did not have the architecture for doing things in the absence of its operational charge. It was simply present in the space in the way that things are present when they have no capacity to be elsewhere. The Hulk was quiet. Bruce was quiet. They stood there for 20 minutes, and then Bruce went back to the lab and pulled up the joint workstation that Bulma had configured and began working on the resonance generator schematic, and did not say anything about the visit. He went back the next day, and the day after. The Galactic Patrol formal classification arrived by transmission on day 5 of the post-battle period, addressed to the Capsule Corporation compound and marked with the specific bureaucratic insignia of the Interdimensional Traveler Registry, which Wise had apparently contacted on the day after the battle, with the divine endorsement that he had indicated would carry more institutional weight than the standard forms. It did. The document was 11 pages, which was considerably shorter than the standard dimensional incursion classification procedure. The reduction attributable to a note from the Supreme Kai's office attached to the front page that read, in its entirety, "Classification expedited by divine recommendation. See attached endorsement. Please do not make this complicated." The classification itself was a new category. Not the existing categories of dimensional traveler, which ranged from temporary visitor to stranded entity to dimensional refugee. Not the existing threat categories, which ranged from negligible to extinction level. A new category created specifically for this situation, described in the document with the careful precision of bureaucratic language, attempting to capture something it had not previously been required to capture. The category was Integrated Resident Provisional. The description read, "An entity of significant power whose continued presence in Universe 7 is acknowledged by divine authority, and whose threat classification is designated conditional, meaning threat level is contingent on contextual factors rather than fixed at any absolute value. Integrated residents, provisional, are entitled to the standard protections afforded to registered residents of Universe 7 and are subject to the standard responsibilities, including cooperation with Galactic Patrol in matters of dimensional security." There was a note at the bottom in different ink, added after the main document was printed, in a handwriting that Bruce recognized from the post-battle meeting. The note read, "The provisional designation is a formality. Wise." Bruce read the document twice. Then he read the note 3 times. He filed it in the secondary workstation's document storage under a folder he labeled Administration, which was what Banner called important things he wanted to be able to find again without making them seem important. The Hulk from inside made the laugh. The formal registration happened on day 7, not a ceremony. Bulma did not do ceremonies for things that she considered operational rather than celebratory, and the registration of a dimensional traveler as a provisional resident of Universe 7 was, in her taxonomy, operational. She processed the paperwork with the efficiency she brought to everything that had forms, and submitted it to the Galactic Patrol Registry through the standard channel that she had been using for Universe 7 administrative matters, since the Tournament of Power had produced an unusual quantity of interdimensional documentation. What she did do on the evening of Day 7 was make dinner, not emergency catering from capsules, not Kaikai's food delivered by Krillin. She cooked using the Capsule Corporation kitchen with its structural reinforcements, and its institutional memory of extraordinary meals. And she made enough food for everyone who had been part of the past 7 weeks in any capacity that could reasonably be described as significant. Goku arrived first, which was inevitable, and stood in the kitchen asking questions about what everything was while simultaneously eating preliminary quantities of it. Vegeta arrived exactly on time and sat at the far end of the table, and did not comment on the dinner, except to eat it with the focused appreciation of someone who understood food as a serious subject. Piccolo came and sat and ate nothing, and was present, which was the version of Piccolo attending a meal that everyone had learned to read as full participation. Gohan came with Videl, who had heard the broad strokes of the week's events from Gohan, and had the specific quality of someone who had married into a situation that kept producing impossible events and had made a genuine peace with that. Krillin came with 18 and Marin spent the first half of the dinner looking at the Hulk with the frank, unguarded curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to perform the wariness that adults perform around things they find unsettling. And eventually she asked him directly why he was green, and the Hulk told her it was a long story, and she said she liked long stories, and he told her the short version. And she listened with the focused attention of someone receiving information they find genuinely interesting. When he finished, she nodded seriously. "That sounds hard," she said. "Yes," the Hulk said. "For a long time it was." "It's still hard?" she asked. The Hulk looked at the table, at the assembled people around it, at the food in the lit room and the evening outside the window and the specific quality of the moment, which was ordinary in all the ways that matter and extraordinary in none of the ways that impose. "Less hard," the Hulk said. Marin nodded again, with the conclusive authority of a child who has processed information and integrated it. Then she asked if she could sit next to him, and he said yes, and she did, and that was the whole of it. After dinner, when the table had been cleared, and the conversation had settled into the comfortable lower register of people who have eaten well and have nowhere they need to be immediately, Goku brought up the question that had been present since the formal registration, and that he had been waiting for the right moment to ask. He had been waiting for a dinner after impossible things moment, specifically because those were the moments when the real answers were available rather than the considered ones. "So," Goku said, "what comes next?" For the situation, not for the universe, for Bruce. The question was specific, and Goku's specificity was always clearer than his directness suggested. Bruce looked at his coffee. The Hulk was present at the new integration depth, both of them in the shared processing space that the past week had made feel less like an interior and more like simply where they were. "Bulma and I are building a resonance generator," Bruce said. "A controlled two-way breach, 6 weeks give or take." "Then," Goku said, "and then I go back," Bruce said. "For a while, there are things there that need," he paused. "Addressing, people, responsibilities. A version of myself that left in the middle of a conversation and should finish it." "After the while," Goku said. Bruce looked at him. "Come back," Bruce said. "If that's..." "Yes," Goku said, with the immediate certainty of someone for whom this was not a question that required consideration. "Obviously yes." Vegeta made a sound from the end of the table. It was a small sound, the kind he deployed when he had a position on something and had decided that the position did not require elaboration. In this case, the position was that the Hulk was welcome to return to a universe that had been adequately tested by his presence and had not broken, and therefore had demonstrated sufficient structural integrity to accommodate a repeat visit. Piccolo nodded once. Krillin raised his mug. Gohan said he looked forward to it. 18 said nothing, which in 18's vocabulary meant the same thing as what everyone else said. Marin, who had been listening from her position next to the Hulk with the attentiveness she brought to things that felt important, looked up at him. "Coming back," she said. "Yes," the Hulk said. "Promise," she said. The Hulk looked at her. In the integration's shared space, both of them considered the weight of that word. The specific gravity of a promise made to someone who had asked for it directly and simply, and without the hedging that adults apply to things they want to be true but aren't certain of. "Promise," the Hulk said. Marin nodded with the same conclusive authority as before and went back to her dessert. The 6 weeks of the resonance generator's construction were the best 6 weeks, not because they were uneventful. They weren't. The Galactic Patrol sent 3 separate representatives to conduct the formal interviews required for the Integrated Resident Provisional Classification, and each interview required a different set of documents, and a different subset of the scanned data, and a different administrative follow-up that Bulma handled with the organized patience of someone who understood that institutional processes had their own logic that was not always the same as useful logic, but that still had to be navigated. Beerus visited twice. The first visit was brief, a check of the post-absorption power signature that he conducted with the thorough professionalism of a god of destruction doing his actual job rather than indulging curiosity. The second visit was for cake, which Wise had apparently told him Bulma was making for Trunks' birthday, and which Beerus had decided took precedence over his scheduled nap. He stayed for 3 hours and ate an amount of cake that restructured the party's catering plan, and had a conversation with Bruce about the divine frequency component of the post-absorption integration that Bruce filed under research notes, and returned to for the next 2 weeks whenever the resonance generator schematic produced a result he wanted to cross-reference against divine energy mechanics. The biosynthetic entity in the northern compound showed no change in its charge level for the first 4 weeks, and then on the 31st day showed a small increase. Not operational, not sufficient to restore the tracking behavior. A small incremental accumulation of gamma charge from the ambient field that the Hulk's presence produced, the same mechanism that had powered Frieza's anchor but running at a fraction of the rate and without the anchor's compression technology. Bulma documented it. Bruce visited the following morning and stood in the contained space for 30 minutes and said nothing, but came back the next day and the day after. The entity did not respond. It did not have the architecture for response. But the charge continued its slow incremental increase, and Bulma continued to document it, and the file she had named Banner 2 grew steadily longer over the 6 weeks with data points that did not yet tell a complete story but that were, accumulating day by day, the beginning of one. On the 40th day of the 6-week window, Bruce and Bulma completed the resonance generator. It was smaller than the amplifier. More elegant, in the way that things become elegant when the design has been through enough iterations to shed everything that isn't necessary. The resonance architecture was built around the membrane's natural geometry in the way Bulma had described, finding the stress points and working with them rather than imposing a new structure over them. It required 2 operators, one to maintain the resonance frequency and one to manage the breach geometry, because the 2 functions were too specific to automate without losing the precision that made the controlled opening different from Frieza's forced tier. Bulma would run the frequency. Bruce would manage the geometry from the inside. They tested it at low power first, not opening a breach but generating the resonance field and confirming that the membrane responded to it in the predicted way, the stress points activating in sequence, the geometry mapping correctly against the theoretical model. It worked. They looked at the data together at the secondary workstation that had become their workstation, and both of them sat with the specific quiet of people who have done something they set out to do and are allowing themselves a moment with that before moving to what comes next. 3 days, Bulma said. The full test, Bruce said. The opening, Bulma said. I want 3 days of additional system checks first, and you need to say goodbye properly. You're terrible at it and I want you to have time to do it right. Bruce looked at her. Not terrible at goodbye, he said. You are, she said. You'll go around saying practical things to everyone instead of what you actually mean. I know how you operate. I have 6 weeks of data. She looked at her display. 3 days, too, Bruce said. And a half, Bulma said. That's not a real unit of time, Bruce said. It is in my lab, Bulma said. 2.5 days, starting now. 2.5 days were not terrible at goodbye. They were, as Bulma had predicted, imperfect in the specific way that banner goodbyes were imperfect. heavy on the practical and light on the direct. But the people receiving them had spent enough time with Bruce Banner to understand that practical was his dialect of direct, and that the thing being said underneath the logistics was the thing that mattered. He talked to Goku about Kai theory and the specific application of emotional intent to power output, a conversation that was also about what it meant to be someone whose power came from caring about things, and how you maintained that in a world that kept testing whether caring was worth it. He talked to Vegeta about the biosynthetic entity's incremental charge increase, and the theoretical possibility of building enough cellular structure over time to develop something that was more than tracking behavior, a conversation that was also about what it meant to be built for one thing, and to become something else through accumulated experience rather than design. He talked to Piccolo for a long time about nothing specific in the way that they had been talking for 6 weeks, adjacent to the things that mattered, in the vocabulary of people who had found a shared language and were still learning its full range. He played board games with Krillin and lost twice and won once, and the winning once felt better than it should have for a physicist who had built a 2-universe resonance generator in 6 weeks. He sat with Marin and told her more of the long story. She listened with the same focused attention as before, and when he finished the section he had chosen to tell, she said, "What happens next? I don't know yet," he said. "I'm still figuring it out." "That's okay," she said, with the simple authority of someone who has not yet learned to find uncertainty threatening. "My dad says the best stories are the ones that aren't finished." Bruce looked at her. "Your dad is right," he said. On the morning of the breach opening, he stood in the garden, the specific corner behind the bamboo that had been his from the second week. Where the morning light came through at an angle, he had started to know the way you know a thing that has become part of the architecture of your days. The Hulk was present and quiet in the way of mornings, both of them in the integration's depth without effort, the maintenance of it having become not an act of will, but simply how they were. Goku was there. He had arrived without announcement, instant transmission to the Kai signature he had memorized on the first day, and that he was going to have memorized whether or not it was here, because that was how Goku's memory worked for things that mattered. He stood at the edge of the bamboo and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "You know you changed things here. Got caught up in your fight," Bruce said. "Accidentally," Goku said with the specific gentle firmness he deployed when he was correcting something that needed correcting. "Not the fight, the other stuff, the way you are, both of you." He looked at the garden. "Vegeta has been different since the garden thing. He hasn't said anything, but he's been different." He paused. "Piccolo's been working on something, I don't know what yet. But I can tell he's working on something." "I didn't do anything," Bruce said. "You were here," Goku said. "You were here in a specific way, and things grew around that." He shrugged, easy and uncomplicated. "That's not nothing." Bruce looked at the bamboo. "Goku," he said. "Yeah, the first day," Bruce said. "When I landed in the crater, you asked if I was okay. Remember," Goku said, "before the assessment, before the threat evaluation, before anything." Bruce paused. That was the whole thing. That one question was the whole thing. Goku looked at him with the expression that was simple and direct and entirely without awareness of how significant it was. Because for Goku it was not significant. It was just what you did when someone arrived somewhere and you didn't know how they got there. "You looked like you needed someone to ask," Goku said. "Yeah," Bruce said. "I did." Resonance generator activated at 10 a.m. with the specific sound of a frequency finding its match. Not loud, not dramatic. A harmonic that was felt more than heard. The dimensional membrane responding to the resonance field with the natural movement of a thing that had been understood rather than forced. The breach opened at 10:14. Controlled and clean, the geometry mapping perfectly against the theoretical model. The aperture sized for a specific transit rather than a general opening. The membrane's stress points held in the precise configuration that allowed passage without propagation. On the other side, visible through the aperture with the specific quality of light that belonged to a different universe, was a sky that Bruce recognized. The particular blue of it, the familiar arrangement of clouds. Home. He stood at the breach for a moment. Bulma was at the generator controls, maintaining the frequency with the focused precision of someone doing something they built a thing specifically to do and are going to do it correctly. The assembled group was behind him. Not a crowd, the specific people. Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo, Gohan, Krillin, 18. Marin, the Hulk, was present and steady in the integration's depth, both of them looking at the aperture, both of them looking at home. 6 weeks, Bulma said from the controls. To come back. The generator ready. 6 weeks, Bruce said. He looked at the assembled group one more time. He did not say the practical things Bulma had predicted he would say instead of what he meant. He just looked at them. Each of them, long enough to mean it. Then he stepped through. The aperture closed behind him with the clean precision of the resonance generator completing its cycle, the membrane drawing back to its natural state, the dimensional geometry returning to its ordinary configuration. Bulma powered down the generator and ran the post-opening diagnostic and confirmed that the membrane was intact and the breach had closed correctly and that the stress points had returned to their pre-opening state and that the whole system had performed within design parameters. She documented everything. Then she sat at the joint workstation for a long moment looking at the resonance schematic on the display, at the elegant architecture of something designed to work with the membrane's nature rather than against it, at the 6 weeks of collaborative development that had produced it. She added a line to the documentation under the results summary. The line read, "System validated. Two-way transit confirmed. Generator ready for repeat activation in 6 weeks." She saved the file. In the northern compound, the monitoring network registered the biosynthetic entity's charge level, holding at its current incremental value, neither increasing nor decreasing, patient in the specific way of things that are not in a hurry, because they have not yet developed the architecture for hurry. Above the compound, the Dragon Ball universe sky continued its ordinary business of being the sky, blue and specific and familiar to everyone under it, holding its particular arrangement of stars that were not the same stars as home, but that had become, over 7 weeks, stars that Bruce Banner knew the way you know a sky that has been above you during things that mattered, the sky he would come back to in 6 weeks. The promise, which was not a small thing, was real and held and was going to be kept, both of them together, choosing. Bruce Banner came back in 5 weeks and 4 days, not because the resonance generator was ready ahead of schedule, though it was, because he had gone back to his world and addressed what needed addressing and found in the process of addressing it, that the integration held in that context too, in that history, among those specific people with their specific memories of him. It held because Piccolo had been right. The integration was not a place. It was not the garden or the dinner table or the particular quality of a Dragon Ball universe morning coming through bamboo at an angle that had become known. It was them, both of them, wherever they were. It had held through the gamma anomaly and the containment field and the biosynthetic reflection and Frieza's 400 years of practiced leverage. And it held in a New York laboratory where Tony Stark looked at the golden-green luminescence of the post-absorption integration and said something technically incorrect about gamma radiation that Bruce corrected with the patient precision of someone who had spent 6 weeks talking about this with Bulma brief and had excellent reference material. It held in a conversation with Natasha that was not easy and that required both the physicist's honesty and the Hulk's specific willingness to be present for difficult things without retreating behind either anger or analysis. It held in a quiet moment standing outside on a clear night looking at a sky that had the familiar stars, the right arrangement, home's specific overhead geography, and feeling not the pull of return but the satisfaction of a system that worked in both places. He came back through the resonance generator's second activation on a Tuesday morning, and Goku was there when the aperture opened, because Goku was always where things were arriving, and that was simply who Goku was. Goku said, "Hey," Bruce said. Good," Bruce said. "Complicated, but good." "That tracks," Goku said. They walked back to the compound in the morning light, and Krillin was already at the long table with coffee and Bulma, was already in the lab running diagnostics on the resonance generators. Second activation, performance, data and Vegeta was already in the Eastern compound training, and had been since 5, and Piccolo was on the roof doing the thing that Piccolo did on the roof, and the compound was simply the compound, running at its ordinary velocity, exactly as it had been. The biosynthetic entity's charge level had increased by a measurable amount during the 5 weeks and 4 days, not operational, not the tracking behavior restored, but enough that Bulma's monitoring network had flagged the increase for documentation, and Bruce had read the documentation before he came back, and had spent the last 2 days of his home visit thinking about what it meant, and what came next for something that was becoming slowly, incrementally, in the specific way that things become when they have no design blueprint for becoming, and are therefore becoming something new, something more than it had been built to be. He did not have an answer yet. He had a question, which was the better starting point anyway. He had a garden with bamboo that caught the morning light at an angle he knew. He had a workstation in a lab with open doors and a collaborator who communicated primarily in accurate data and coffee, and the specific form of respect that is simply taking someone's questions seriously. He had a small person who wanted to hear the long story, and was going to get it, chapter by chapter, over the evenings of whatever came next. He had a universe that was not his origin and had become, in the specific way that places become when you have been present in them during things that mattered and people have been present with you. Somewhere he was allowed to be, both of them, fully and on purpose. The Dragon Ball universe had given Bruce Banner something that his own world, with its histories and its damages and its complicated weight of everything that had gone wrong, had struggled to provide in sufficient quantity: time. Time in which the integration could find its depth without someone reaching for a containment device. Time in which the choosing could practice itself until it became not a decision but a character. Time in which two people who had been at war could become what they had always been capable of being, which was a system, both load-bearing, neither primary nor secondary, the whole genuinely greater than the sum. The Dragon Ball universe was good at this. It was underneath the power levels and the tournament arcs and the cosmic threats and the gods with opinions about desert, a universe that believed in the capacity of things to become better than they were. Not naively, not without the evidence of how much becoming costs, but genuinely and with the specific kind of stubbornness that keeps being right often enough to be worth maintaining. Goku had asked if he was okay before anything else. That was still the whole thing. And now, 5 weeks and 4 days after he had stepped through the resonance generator's aperture and gone back to address the things that needed addressing, Bruce Banner stepped back through it into a Tuesday morning in a universe that knew how to ask the right question. Both of them, home, in the way that home is not only where you started, but also where you chose to return. The next chapter was already beginning. The biosynthetic entity in the northern compound was still accumulating charge. Wise's note in the cosmic registry still said choosing, and in a sector of space that did not appear on galactic patrol charts, a golden figure who had looked at the specific quality of Krillin's 3-meter proximity certainty from the upper atmosphere and had not had a category for it, sat with the data from 7 weeks of failed operations and 1 unanticipated conversation, and was building something new, not a weapon, something considerably more dangerous than that, a question. The same question that had started everything, standing in the upper air of a planet that kept producing more significance per square kilometer than anywhere else in the jurisdiction. What do you actually want? Frieza did not have the answer yet, but he had never not found the answer to a question he committed to, and that more than anything else that had happened in 7 weeks was worth paying attention to. The Dragon Balls have been gathered, the integration holds, Mori stories await.